Story 1, Digital Doppelganger, Identity Theft Terror. I never thought much about my online presence. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of day that drags itself through the week with no particular distinction. I was at my apartment in the city, a modest two-bedroom on the 4th floor of a brick building that creaked with age and the hum of distant traffic. The windows framed a narrow view of the street below, where old men sat on benches and kids kicked soccer balls against the cracked pavement. I liked the quiet, the way the city felt alive but not overwhelming. I was scrolling through my email after work, the usual mix of newsletters, promotions, and a handful of messages from friends. That's when I saw it, a notification from my bank. Unusual activity detected. My heart skipped. I didn't even know my bank sent alerts like that. Clicking it open, I found a list of transactions I didn't recognize, several online purchases from stores I'd never heard of, one expensive electronics order, and a wire transfer to an account in another state. The total drained more than half my savings. I stared at the screen, disbelief pooling in my chest. There had to be some mistake. I called the bank immediately, my voice tight and shaky. The representative confirmed what I feared. These were legitimate charges made with my account. They assured me they'd freeze my accounts and start an investigation. But their reassurance felt hollow, a bandage slapped on a wound that was already bleeding. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop, trying to think through what had happened. I changed my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication everywhere I could, and scanned my computer for malware. Nothing. No signs of hacking, no suspicious downloads. Just the creeping sense that someone had slipped past me, someone who knew me well enough to impersonate me. Then the messages started. At first, just a few from friends, confused and worried. They said they received strange texts from my number, messages full of odd demands and strange links. I checked my phone. Nothing unusual. No sent messages. When I tried calling one of them back, the line was busy. Later, I learned they'd gotten a call from a number that looked like mine, but wasn't. A spoofed caller ID. The next morning, I got an email from my boss. It was polite but firm. We need to talk about those emails you sent yesterday. I'm concerned about the tone and content. I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't send anything like that. I logged into my work email. My sent folder was empty. Then, out of habit, I checked my social media accounts. That's when I saw it. My Facebook profile had been updated. New posts, strange status updates, photos I didn't take. One post invited people to a fundraiser for a charity I'd never heard of. Another was a rant about politics that felt completely out of character. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others confused, some outright hostile. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me about things I never said. I tried to delete the posts, but the account told me I was logged out. When I tried to reset the password, the email address linked to the account had been changed. Panic settled in, cold and relentless. Someone was inside my digital life, wearing my face, my voice, my name. But they weren't just pretending, they were destroying everything I cared about. I reached for my phone and dialed my best friend, Maria. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, have you seen my Facebook?" "Someone's doing something weird," I said, my voice cracking. There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said, "I thought it was you. Those posts, they're really out there." "I swear, it's not me." "Then who is it?" she asked, and I had no answer. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the glow of the streetlights spilling through the window. My phone buzzed with new notifications, messages, friend requests, warnings from people I didn't know. The city outside was calm, indifferent, but inside, a storm was gathering. Someone was taking over my life, piece by piece, and I had no idea how to stop it. As I shut the laptop, a new email popped up. Subject: we need to talk. You're not as safe as you think. I didn't recognize the sender. I didn't open it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Something had started, and there was no turning back. I paced the room, the glow from the screen casting long shadows along the walls. Every instinct screamed at me to delete the message, to pretend none of this was happening. But curiosity, that dangerous friend, pulled me back to the keyboard. My fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling as I clicked open the email. The message was short, almost cryptic. They're closer than you think. Trust no one. Check the files you've overlooked. No signature, no clues. Just a warning hanging in the digital void. I glanced around the apartment, as if expecting someone to be watching. The silence pressed down, suffocating. I reopened the folder of old documents I'd saved weeks ago, the ones I'd never had time to sift through. Something buried there might be the key, if only I could find it before it was too late. Fingers trembling, I scrolled through the faded texts, searching for patterns. Suddenly, a name caught my eye, one I'd seen before, but never connected. Morning came with a dull ache behind my eyes and a thick fog in my mind, like the night's unease had seeped into my bones. I sat back down at my desk, the keyboard cold beneath my fingers. That name I'd seen before, Elliot, was still burned in my mind. It wasn't a friend or coworker, just a name buried in one of the old files I'd saved months ago. I had no idea why it had stood out, but I felt an almost magnetic pull to it, like a thread waiting to be unraveled. I opened the folder again, this time with sharper focus. The documents were a jumble of notes, emails, and scanned receipts from a past project that had been scrapped long ago. Most of it was meaningless now, but one email in particular caught my attention, a message from a colleague named Elliot, dated nearly a year earlier. It was short, almost casual, but the tone was off, a little too pointed. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you really should take a look at your account security. I noticed a few odd logins last week. It might be nothing, but better safe than sorry. I frowned. I didn't remember anyone warning me about that. And I never thought to check because, honestly, I hadn't believed it was anything serious then. I sent a quick message to Maria, asking if she had ever heard of this Elliot. She replied almost immediately, "Nope. Never heard the name. Who is he?" That only deepened the mystery. I decided to dig deeper into my account activity. My bank's online portal had a surprisingly detailed log of recent access. As I scrolled, my stomach sank. There were logins from devices I didn't recognize, one from a coffee shop downtown, despite me being at home all day, another from a location miles away from the city. They were staggered over the last 2 weeks, right as the impersonations had begun ramping up. I called the bank's fraud department, hands shaking so badly I had to set the phone down twice to steady myself. The representative was polite but firm. "We've flagged those transactions, and the accounts are frozen for now. But it looks like someone has your login credentials. You'll need to change your passwords and monitor your accounts closely." I thanked her, but the damage was already done. The money wasn't just sitting there, it had been siphoned off in small increments, the kind that flew under the radar until they didn't. After hanging up, I stared at the screen, the weight of helplessness settling in. This person wasn't just a faceless hacker, they had my details, knew my routines, and were actively destroying everything I had. I decided to check my email log next. Maybe there was a clue in the messages I'd missed. Sorting through hundreds of emails wasn't easy, but something caught my eye, a series of password reset requests I didn't initiate. They were all denied, thankfully, but the sheer number was alarming. Whoever was behind this was methodical, patient, and relentless. Maria called again later that afternoon. Her voice was tight. "I checked your Facebook. More weird posts. One of your old photos was tagged with a message, 'Watch your back.' I'm seriously creeped out." "Me too," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's like they're playing a game. But why me? What do they want?" "I don't know," Maria said. "But maybe it's not random. Do you remember anyone you pissed off? Anyone who might want to ruin your life?" I thought back, trying to dredge up any recent conflicts. There were a few tense moments at work, a falling out with an ex, but nothing that felt severe enough for this. And yet, this felt personal. That night, I sat on my couch, phone in hand, scrolling through the latest messages and posts from my impersonator. The posts were bizarre, sometimes cruel, half-truths twisted into lies designed to alienate the people closest to me. I tried to respond, to clarify, but every time I did, the chaos escalated. Friends unfriended me, family grew distant, and the sense of isolation deepened. Then, an idea struck me. What if the warning in the email was right? What if I was missing something vital in those old files? I went back to the folder, this time looking for anything unusual beyond the name Elliot. My eyes caught a small text file named backup_keys.txt. I hadn't remembered creating it. Curiosity took over. I opened it carefully. Inside was a list of what looked like usernames and passwords, some for work accounts, others for personal sites. My heart pounded. How could I have left such sensitive information lying around? Then, at the bottom of the list, a line that wasn't mine. "Access granted, April 15th, 23, 2:17 a.m. Elliot S." I froze. The date was a few weeks before the impersonation started. Someone had accessed my accounts then, using credentials I didn't give them. My phone buzzed suddenly, jolting me from the discovery. A new message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or more than your accounts will be taken." The screen blurred as my breath quickened. I realized this was no longer just about stolen money or social media. It was a calculated invasion, a slow unraveling of every part of my life, and whoever was behind it was watching me, always one step ahead. I sat back, hands trembling as I stared at the warning. The line between the digital and the real world had blurred. And now, the game had changed. I had to find Elliot before it was too late. Morning came with the kind of bleak gray light that made the world feel washed out and tired. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had spent hours combing through my backups, my emails, my cloud storage, looking for anything else the impersonator might have touched or left behind. The backup_keys.txt file was the only anomaly, but it was a threat I couldn't ignore. I tried to think about what that line, "Access granted, April 15th, 23, 2:17 a.m. Elliot S." could mean. The timestamp was precise, almost clinical. Whoever logged in then had the exact username and password, or something that let them bypass two-factor authentication. That wasn't just accidental, it was planned. And whoever Elliot was, they had been inside my digital life long before the impersonation started. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "You're wasting time. Find Elliot fast, or this ends badly." No name, no signature. Just a threat wrapped in impatience. My hands shook, but I forced myself to reply. "Who are you? What do you want?" Minutes passed. Then the reply came. "You don't want to know. But if you want your life back, look where it all started." I stared at the screen, the cryptic message burning into my brain. Where did it all start? My mind flashed to the email account I'd long since stopped using, the one I'd set up years ago during college, the one I thought was irrelevant now. But what if the impersonator had started there? I launched the email app and logged in. The inbox was a graveyard of unread newsletters, forgotten promotions, and old messages. But one email caught my eye, dated April 14th, 2023, one day before the recorded access in the backup_keys.txt. The sender was familiar but unexpected, Elliot S. The subject line read, "Your future depends on this." My heart hammered as I opened it. The message was brief, almost cryptic. If you're reading this, then someone has already crossed the line. You need to protect yourself. Change everything: passwords, accounts, your routines. They know your patterns, your habits. You might think you're safe, but you're not. Trust no one. No signature, no explanation. Just a warning. I leaned back, trying to grasp what this meant. Elliot wasn't just the impersonator, they were a warning from someone who knew what was coming. Or maybe they were a part of it. Before I could think further, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I answered, voice steady despite the dread curling in my stomach. "Hello?" I said. "Elliot," a voice whispered, low and distorted. "Who is this?" I demanded. "You don't want to keep digging," the voice said. "Stop now, or you'll lose everything." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. This wasn't just identity theft anymore. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was the prey. I knew I had to find Elliot. But the closer I got, the more dangerous it became. Then, a message popped up on my laptop, an email alert from my bank. I clicked it open, dread pooling in my stomach. Unauthorized transfer detected, $3,200 withdrawn from your checking account. My breath caught. The impersonator was draining my accounts faster than I could react. I called the bank immediately, frantically trying to freeze my funds, but it was too late. The money was gone. I slumped back in my chair, feeling the walls close in. This wasn't just a nightmare I could wake up from. It was my new reality. And Elliot, whoever they were, was at the center of it all. The line between hunter and hunted had blurred. And now, I wasn't sure if I was even the real me anymore. The screen on my phone blinked with a barrage of notifications, transfers completed, suspicious logins from unfamiliar devices, even a credit card application I never authorized. My mind raced to piece together how deep the breach went. Had they accessed my email? My social media? My identity itself? Desperation clawed at me. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But calling the authorities felt futile. By the time they acted, Elliot or the person behind that name would be long gone, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces. Instead, I started digging through my digital footprint, scanning for any overlooked clues, any trace of the intruder's presence. Hours passed, the glow of the laptop screen casting eerie shadows across the room. Then, a flicker, a subtle anomaly in my email headers, a timestamp that didn't align with the sender's claimed location. It was a breadcrumb, left carelessly or deliberately, but it was something. I traced the IP address. It pinged back to a server farm halfway across the world, shrouded behind layers of proxies. Still, it was a lead, one I could follow. In that moment, the fear shifted from paralysis to determination. Elliot was out there, weaving a web of deception, but I wasn't ready to be just another victim. If the line between hunter and hunted had blurred, then maybe it was time I learned to navigate the shadows. I powered down the laptop and reached for my coat. The night was just beginning, and so was the chase. Stepping into the cold air, I felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The next morning, the numbness hadn't lifted. I tried to call Sarah. My voice was hoarse from hours of shouting into the void the night before, but I needed to hear her say something real, something that reminded me I still existed beyond this chaos. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm coming over." An hour later, she was standing in my apartment doorway, her eyes wary, scanning the room as if expecting the walls to crumble and reveal some hidden horror. She held a stack of printouts, screenshots of conversations, bank statements, even a few of the bizarre social media posts Elliot had made pretending to be me. "I don't know who this Elliot is," Sarah said, voice low, "but whoever it is has destroyed everything. You have to prove you're real." I shook my head. "I've tried. Every time I contact the bank, every time I send messages to friends, it's like this: imposter is one step ahead. They reply faster, write better, make me look like the liar." She bit her lip, then said, "What about the police?" I had already thought of that. I did. They want me to file a report, but they said it's complicated: identity theft, online fraud. They have no leads and no way to catch someone hiding behind proxies and fake profiles. I'm supposed to just wait and watch everything fall apart. Sarah's expression softened, but the worry was written all over her face. "We can't just wait. You need to confront this person. Find out who Elliot really is." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe anyone could help me take back control. But deep down, a cold voice whispered that I was already too far gone. That afternoon, I sat in front of my laptop again, the screen illuminating my tired face. I went back to the email headers, the IP addresses, the breadcrumbs I'd found the night before. The problem was that every lead led to a dead-end: servers in countries with lax regulations, proxy chains designed to throw off even the most determined trackers. But then, something new caught my eye: a pattern in the timestamps of the fraudulent transactions. They weren't random, they happened in bursts, clustered around specific hours. I cross-referenced those hours with time zones and realized they aligned oddly with the late evenings in my own city. Could Elliot be closer than I thought? I messaged Sarah. "I think Elliot is local. Maybe even someone I know." She replied almost instantly, "That changes everything. Be careful." I didn't answer. Instead, I started digging through my recent interactions, my social media followers, anyone who might have motive or opportunity. My heart sank as I scrolled through old messages, trying to catch a hint or slip up. Then, a message popped up on one of my dormant social accounts, a direct message I hadn't noticed before. It was from an anonymous handle, but the tone was chillingly familiar. The words were cryptic, mocking, "You're losing yourself. How's it feel to watch someone else live your life better?" I opened the message again, searching for clues. The language, the syntax, it was deliberate, taunting. Whoever Elliot was, they knew me intimately, maybe even too well. I showed the message to Sarah when she came over that evening. She frowned. "This isn't just hacking. This is personal." We tried to trace the message's origin, but like everything else, it was routed through layers of anonymizers. Still, the local time zone pattern gave us a thread to follow. The next day, I went to a small internet cafe a few blocks away from my apartment. It was the kind of place people overlooked: no cameras, cheap hourly rates, and a steady stream of students and freelancers. I logged into a burner account I'd set up earlier, one Elliot didn't know about, and started chatting in a tech forum I remembered from years ago. I posted a vague question about bypassing VPNs, hoping to bait Elliot into responding. It was a long shot, but I needed to provoke something. After nearly an hour, a reply popped up. "Looking for me?" My heart pounded. The username was a jumble of letters, but the style was unmistakable. It matched the messages I'd received before. I typed back, careful not to reveal too much. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The answer came quickly: "To see if you still have what it takes to fight back." cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This wasn't just about money or chaos, it was a game to them, a twisted challenge. I asked, "Who are you?" The reply was a taunt, "You'll find out soon enough." Before I could respond, the cafe's old desktop flickered and went black. The entire place lost power for a few seconds, then the lights snapped back on. I looked around. No one else seemed to notice, but I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. The timing was too coincidental. I packed up hastily and left, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. Outside, the streets were quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Back at my apartment, I locked every door and window, double-checked my devices, and tossed my phone onto the kitchen counter. I was running out of options. Elliot was no longer just online, they were closing in. And then, as I sat in the dark, my phone buzzed. A new message. From my own number. "You're out of time." I woke to the faint gray light of dawn slipping through the blinds, the silence in my apartment feeling heavier than usual. The night had been restless. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a stretch, every noise outside the apartment twisting into something sinister. I'd barricaded myself here after that last message, convinced Elliot, if that was even their real name, was closer than ever. But when morning came, and the world outside continued as usual, I realized I was the one who'd been holding my breath. I needed a plan. Not a desperate scramble, but something better. Something final. I pulled on a sweatshirt and headed out, leaving the apartment door unlocked behind me. If Elliot wanted in, they'd have to work harder than that. The internet cafe was empty when I arrived, the stale smell of coffee and old computers greeting me like an unwelcome reminder. I sat down at the same terminal where I'd baited Elliot the day before, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I typed a new message into the forum, deliberately vague but with a trace of truth. "If you want to end this, meet me tonight at the park near the old library." No tricks. I hit send, heart hammering in my chest. The reply came almost instantly. "See you there." I didn't know if it was a trap or a surrender, but I had to find out. The hours dragged on, each minute a small torment. I left the cafe just after sunset, the park's edge already swallowed by shadows. The library loomed behind me, its stone facade cracked and worn, a monument to forgotten stories. I stayed in the dark for a long time, watching the empty paths and rustling leaves. Then, footsteps, soft, deliberate, approached. "I'm here," I called out, voice tight. A figure emerged from the shadows, lean, nondescript, wearing a hood that masked their face. I recognized the posture, the way they held themselves, the same quiet confidence I'd glimpsed in our online exchanges. "Why?" I asked, voice breaking. The figure hesitated, then lowered the hood. It was a face I never expected to see. Mark, a former colleague from the marketing firm where I'd worked before everything fell apart. His eyes were tired, but there was a flicker of something else, regret, maybe, or exhaustion. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said quietly. "I wanted to teach you a lesson. You always thought you were untouchable online, didn't you? Perfect little digital life, no consequences. I just wanted to show you what it's like to lose control." I swallowed hard, anger and disbelief mixing in my chest. "You stole from me. You destroyed my relationships. You turned my life into a nightmare." Mark nodded. "I know. And I'm sorry. I didn't plan to ruin everything. It spiraled out of control." "Why me?" I pressed. "Why not someone else?" He looked away. "Because you never took me seriously. Because you ignored me when I asked for help. Because you made decisions that hurt others, and I wanted you to understand what that felt like." The weight of his words settled over me. I thought back to the layoffs, the endless meetings, the times I'd brushed him off. I hadn't been the friend or colleague he needed. But none of that justified what he'd done. "I'm not the same person you knew," I said softly. "I've changed." Mark's eyes searched mine. "Maybe. But you have to prove it." We talked for hours, beneath the dying light of the park lamps, unraveling the tangled mess between us. He admitted to every action, the hacking, the impersonations, the financial sabotage. I told him about the chaos, the isolation, the fear that had taken root in me. In the end, he agreed to help restore what he could. Together, we contacted the bank, reversed fraudulent transactions, and reported the identity theft. Mark provided access logs and data trails that only he could have, evidence that I was the real victim. Slowly, the digital noose began to loosen. But the hardest part was rebuilding trust with friends, family, even myself. It wasn't immediate. Messages still came from accounts I didn't control, rumors whispered in the corners of social media. Some relationships were fractured beyond repair. The financial scars would linger for months, maybe years. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, I found a strange kind of clarity. I stopped hiding behind screens and passwords. I reached out to those I'd pushed away, not with explanations or excuses, but with honest apologies. I learned to accept vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a necessary bridge between people. Mark disappeared after a week, leaving behind a note, "I'm sorry. I hope you find peace." I never saw him again. Months later, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I looked at my phone, now stripped of the endless notifications and angry messages. It was just a tool, nothing more. I had survived the nightmare. Not because I fought alone, but because I faced the truth that sometimes the monsters we fear most aren't strangers lurking in the dark, but the shadows cast by our own choices and blind spots. The world online would never be safe, not completely. But I had learned to navigate its dangers with open eyes and a cautious heart. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to live again. Story 2, Endless Tale, The Relentless Pursuer. The highway stretched out in front of me like a ribbon of black silk, edged with pale yellow lines that flickered under the sway of my headlights. I kept my eyes on the road, fingers tapping the steering wheel to a song on the radio, something low and steady. My breath fogged the edges of the windshield, and I reached over to crack the window a little, letting in the cool night air. The smell of pine from the nearby woods drifted in, sharp and fresh, mixing with the faint scent of coffee I'd spilled on my jacket during my break. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive home, the kind I'd made dozens of times before. The stretch of highway I was on was familiar, a lonely road that wound through miles of farmland and small patches of forest before opening onto the outskirts of town. I liked these drives, the silence, the way the stars hung low and bright in the sky. They gave me space to think, to unravel the knots of tension that built up during my shifts. Tonight, though, something felt off. I first noticed it when the car behind me appeared in my rearview mirror, its headlights sharp and steady, just as mine had been when I first started driving that night. It was a nondescript sedan, dark-colored, no particular make that stood out. At first, I thought nothing of it. On a highway, it was normal for other cars to be on the road, especially at this hour when most people were heading home or pulling late shifts themselves. But as the miles ticked by, the car stayed there, always behind me, never passing or falling back. I glanced over my shoulder, checking the distance. It was close enough to make me uncomfortable, but not so close that I could accuse the driver of tailgating. The headlights never blinked, never dipped for a moment as if signaling or turning off. It was like the car was glued to my rear bumper. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just coincidence, or some late-night commuter who happened to be going my way. I sped up slightly, creeping past the posted speed limit, but the car matched me, its presence unwavering. I slowed down, then sped up again, testing the pattern. Still there. The radio played softly, a dull background hum against the otherwise empty night. The trees on either side of the road blurred past in long streaks of shadow and light, the silence pressing in on me like a weight. I felt my throat tighten, a small knot of unease knotting in my stomach. The highway was deserted, no other cars in sight. The only sound was the steady thrum of the engine and my own breathing. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the familiar landmarks that passed by, the rusted sign for Miller's farm, the faded white fence that curved along the roadside, the old wooden bridge over the creek. Each mile marker I passed was a small victory against the creeping tension in my chest. I told myself it was paranoia, the exhaustion from the hospital shift twisting my mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally reached the stretch of highway that curved around the edge of the forest, the headlights behind me remained steady, their glow unwavering in my mirror. I flicked the headlights off then on again, hoping to catch the other driver's reaction. The car did the same, almost in sync, as if watching me as closely as I watched it. A shiver ran down my spine. I considered pulling over at the next rest stop, but the darkness beyond the trees looked endless, and the small parking area was just a patch of cracked asphalt ringed by dim streetlights. Still, I slowed down and moved toward the shoulder, the tires crunching on gravel as I glanced in the mirror. The car followed suit, pulling in behind me with no hesitation. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling, staring at the rearview mirror. The headlights were bright, casting long shadows across the empty highway. Then, something caught my eye, a movement in the passenger window of the other car. I blinked, leaning forward, squinting. A face pressed against the glass. Not just any face, a man's face, pale and tense, eyes wide and unblinking. His features were sharp, almost gaunt, framed by dark hair that clung to his forehead in damp strands. The glass distorted his expression, making it hard to read, but the intensity was unmistakable. He stared at me, not blinking, not turning away. My heart leapt into my throat. I slammed the car into drive and peeled off the shoulder, tires skidding slightly on loose gravel. The sedan followed immediately, headlights fixed on me like a predator's gaze. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just some random driver anymore. This was something else, something deliberate. I floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward as the highway stretched out before me, empty and endless. And behind me, the headlights stayed the same, unblinking, relentless. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced my mind clear. The next exit was only a mile ahead, a chance to lose them in the maze of side streets. I flicked on my signal, heart hammering as I veered off the highway, praying the shadows would swallow me whole before they caught up. The roar of the engine drowned out everything else as I plunged into the night, each turn a desperate gamble. The side streets were a tangled mess of cracked pavement and faded street signs, the kind of place where the map on my phone seemed to lose its grip. I swallowed hard and tried to think. Who was this man? What did he want? The questions spun in my head, but there was no time to settle on an answer. I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. I hit the gas again, tires squealing as I accelerated through the quiet neighborhood. Houses slipped past in a blur, windows dark and shuttered, no one stirring in the dead hour. For a moment, the car behind me disappeared from view. Relief flooded through me, sharp and sudden. Maybe I'd shaken him off. Maybe the whole thing was some twisted nightmare. But then, just as I slowed for a stop sign, those headlights reappeared, sliding into my sight line like a ghost refusing to vanish. I clenched the steering wheel, fingers digging into the leather. The headlights followed me through every turn, every stop, every acceleration. It was like being caught in a tightening noose, the space between us unchanging, the distance fixed as if the other driver had a precise, unyielding calculation etched into his mind. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but the air felt thick, sticky against my throat. I remembered the face, the man pressed against the passenger window, eyes wide, unblinking, almost desperate. That image twisted inside my skull, refusing to let go. What had he wanted from me? What was he trying to say, or do? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced down, hands still trembling. A text from Jess. Did you get home okay last night? I hesitated. I couldn't tell her about this, not yet. Not while the man was still out there, looming behind me like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I typed back a quick yeah, all good, and locked the screen, shoving the phone into the console. The road ahead curved sharply left, leading out from the neighborhood into a stretch of industrial warehouses and shuttered storefronts. I decided on a gamble. If I could find a place with other cars, or even a handful of people, maybe the stalker wouldn't dare follow. I kept my speed moderate, eyes darting to every reflection, every glint of metal, searching for a hint that the other car might have paused or slowed. It didn't. The headlights remained unwavering and constant. I spotted a 24-hour gas station up ahead, its neon sign flickering weakly in the cold night air. Without thinking, I veered toward it, heart pounding as I pulled into the lot. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the empty pumps. The place was deserted except for a lone attendant inside the small convenience store, who glanced up briefly when I rolled in. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, watching the rearview mirror. The headlights stopped at the edge of the lot, just beyond the pumps, their beams slicing through the darkness but never flickering. The other car idled silently, its engine drowned by the night's stillness. I opened my door cautiously and stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. The silence felt oppressive, almost suffocating. I walked slowly toward the convenience store, the crunch of my boots on gravel loud in the emptiness. Inside, the attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up as I entered. "Long night?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. He shrugged. "You could say that. Not much traffic this late." He glanced toward the window facing the parking lot. "You seem jumpy. Something wrong?" I hesitated, then decided to speak, my voice low. "There's a car following me. For hours." His eyes narrowed. "On this road? That's not exactly a busy highway. You sure it's not just coincidence?" I shook my head. "No. It's like they're watching me. The headlights never blink, the distance never changes." And then I saw a face pressed against the window. The man's expression shifted, worry flickering across his features. "You want me to call the cops?" I swallowed. "Maybe later. I just need to figure out what's going on." He nodded slowly. "If you want, I can watch the lot for a bit. See if that car leaves." I looked back through the window. The other vehicle was still there, engine running, headlights fixed on my car like a predator's stare. I nodded, grateful for any help. "Thanks," I said quietly. He gave a small, grim smile. "Don't worry. You're not alone out here." I stepped back outside, the night suddenly feeling colder, heavier. The man's face lingered in my mind, a haunting imprint I couldn't erase. Who was he? Why was he following me so relentlessly? And most unsettling of all, what would happen if I stopped running? I climbed back into the car, heart still hammering in my chest. The headlights stayed put at the edge of the lot, watching, waiting. I glanced at the gas station attendant, who gave me a small nod through the glass before turning back to his counter. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, deciding to trust the stranger's offer to keep watch. Maybe I could outmaneuver this nightmare yet. But as I merged onto the highway again, A sudden flicker in the rearview mirror caught my eye, a movement, subtle but unmistakable. The man's face was there again, pressed against the passenger window, only this time his expression was different. There was a slow, deliberate smile curling at the edges of his mouth. And then, just as quickly, he vanished. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed on the brakes. The road behind me was empty. No headlights. No car. Just the cold, endless dark. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn started bleeding pale light across the sky, I was certain of one thing: I wasn't dealing with a random tale. This was personal. I drove back to the gas station, the only landmark I could think of as a waypoint. The attendant was already there, wiping down the counter, eyes alert but tired. I pulled up slowly, my heart thudding as I stepped out. "You still see it?" he asked without preamble. His voice was low, guarded. I nodded. The car. It was behind me all night, then disappeared. He sighed and motioned for me to follow him inside. Behind the counter, a small drawer sat slightly ajar, showing a worn notebook. "You're not the first," he said quietly, flipping to a page dated a few weeks earlier. "Others have reported the same thing: car following, no blinking lights, sometimes a face. Mostly on this stretch of highway after midnight." "Why?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "No idea. Some say it's someone stalking travelers, maybe a local with a grudge. Could be someone who's been watching these roads for a long time." My stomach twisted. "Have the police done anything?" He shook his head. "They don't take it seriously. No one's reported an actual crime yet. Just sightings. People too scared or too shaken to say more." I leaned in, scanning the notebook's entries. Names, dates, times, strangers caught in the same trap, all sharing the same pattern. The last entry chilled me the most. Saw the face again, this time it was a man, smiling. Stayed until I left the highway. Haven't been back since. I closed the notebook slowly, the weight of it settling in my chest. "Why do you stay here if you know this is happening?" He looked away, voice rough. "Because someone has to. To warn people. To keep the lights on for as long as I can." I swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of his words. "I don't want to be another name in that book." He gave me a long look. "Then you need to understand what you're dealing with. And you need to be careful." That was when the front door rattled, a sharp knock echoing through the small shop. The attendant's body tensed. I followed his gaze to the window. A silhouette stood just beyond the glass, tall, still. For a moment, I thought it might be the stranger from the car, but the shape blurred as the figure turned and disappeared into the morning haze. The attendant locked the door behind me as I left, his eyes lingering on the horizon. I climbed back into my car, the notebook heavy in my bag, and pulled onto the highway. Every mile felt like a countdown. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting those unblinking headlights to reappear. But the road behind me stayed empty, the dawn light growing stronger with each passing minute. Then, just as I reached a sharp bend, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "Stop running. We've been waiting." My breath caught. I looked back again. This time, the headlights weren't just there, they were closer than ever. And suddenly, I understood, this wasn't about chasing me down. It was about letting me know I couldn't escape. Not yet. I gripped the wheel tighter, heart pounding as the road stretched out ahead, endless and unforgiving. Somewhere behind those headlights was a man who had been watching me for hours, or maybe longer. And now, he wanted me to know I was exactly where he wanted me to be. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. There was no turning back. The radio crackled softly in the background, a faint static whisper that felt almost like a countdown. I flicked the dial, trying to catch a different station, something to drown out the ominous hum of the engine behind me, but the frequencies warped and bled into each other, an indecipherable mess. The night pressed in, thick, suffocating, and the headlights never wavered, like twin ghosts locked onto my tail. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of what I knew and what I feared. The man behind me wasn't some random threat. He was calculated, patient, and terrifyingly certain. He had tracked me through shadows I hadn't even realized I was casting. Every mile I put between us felt less like freedom and more like a trap tightening around my throat. With a sharp breath, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The headlights had dipped momentarily, then surged back, relentless. I imagined his face, pale and unreadable, eyes burning with a cold fire. It was a face I didn't want to see, but one that haunted the edges of my memory anyway. This wasn't just a pursuit, it was a message. One I wasn't sure I was ready to decipher. The road curved ahead, weaving through dense woods that seemed to lean in, eager to swallow me whole. My fingers itched for my phone, but the screen was dead, a casualty of the long hours and the silence that had swallowed the countryside. No calls. No texts. No way to call for help. But help wouldn't come. Not in this place. Not tonight. I pressed the accelerator down harder, the roar of the engine a desperate soundtrack to my spiraling thoughts. Every turn, every shadow flickering at the edge of my vision, felt like a countdown to something inevitable. And yet, somewhere beneath the fear, a stubborn spark of defiance flared. I refused to be caught, refused to let this shadow dictate the end of my story. Ahead, a faint glow marked the outskirts of a small town, its sleepy lights promising safety, or at least salvation of some kind. But the closer I got, the more the headlights behind me seemed to multiply, an army of ghosts emerging from the darkness. And then, as if sensing my rising hope, they blinked out, vanishing like smoke. For a moment, silence reigned. Then my phone buzzed once. A single message, no sender ID. You're closer than you think. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. The game wasn't over. And somehow, I knew it had only just begun. The message lingered on my phone like a whispered threat. You're closer than you think. Outside, the highway stretched ahead empty, save for the occasional glint of roadside reflectors and the dull flicker of distant traffic lights in the town I'd passed moments ago. Behind me, the headlights had returned. Not one, but two now. The second car hadn't been there before, or I hadn't noticed it. Maybe I was losing my mind. I tried to steady my breathing and focused on the road. The speedometer read 75. I wasn't going to stop. Not yet. Not while that cold face haunted the window of the car behind me. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time 3 words, don't look back. I swallowed hard. The irony wasn't lost on me. How could I not? The urge to check was nearly unbearable, as if the answer to all this hiding and chasing was just pressed against the glass, waiting for me to meet it. But I obeyed. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. I told myself the only way out was forward. The road twisted sharply to the left, then right, climbing a hill that made the headlights behind me disappear for a moment. My heart pounded in the silence. I imagined the car stalling, or maybe turning off. But when the hill crested, they were there again, tailing me with the same steady, ruthless devotion. I passed a gas station, the kind that never closes but rarely sees customers at this hour. Its fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across cracked concrete. I slowed, considering. Maybe I could find a phone, or at least a place to catch my breath. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, the lights behind me didn't hesitate. If anything, they seemed to pulse brighter, as if mocking my pause. I pressed the accelerator again. The engine growled beneath me, the tires humming against the asphalt. The night stretched out like a trap closing in from all sides. Then, unexpectedly, the car behind me veered off the highway and onto the gravel shoulder. For a split second, I thought they might be giving up. Relief washed over me, brief and fragile. But then the headlights flicked off. My breath caught. Total darkness swallowed the road behind me. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching. The car skidded to a stop just as a figure appeared in my passenger window, a man's face pressed close to the glass, pale and slick with sweat, eyes wide and unblinking. I froze. The window was locked, but the panic surged so violently I wrenched the door handle anyway. It didn't budge. My key was still in the ignition, but the engine had stalled in my panic. "Who are you?" I gasped, voice tight and trembling. The man didn't answer. He just stared, his breath fogging the glass. His eyes seemed to bore into me, searching for something or threatening to take something away. I fumbled for the gear shift, finally managing to crank the ignition. The engine roared back to life. I slammed it into drive and peeled away, the car fishtailing for a moment on the gravel. The headlights behind me flicked back on as the man's figure disappeared into the shadows. My heart hammered in my chest like a frantic drumbeat. I knew I couldn't outrun this, not on a deserted highway, not with a foe who had planned this all along. I glanced at my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Just the eerie glow of the screen and the unsettling knowledge that he was still out there. I needed help. I needed answers. But first, I needed to survive the night. And then, as if the nightmare wanted to remind me it wasn't finished, my phone buzzed once more. Only this time, the message was a photo. It was taken from inside my car. And there, in the passenger seat beside me, was the man's face, close enough that I could see the cold, calculating glint in his eyes. I dropped the phone, the screen shattering against the floorboard. The road ahead blurred as tears stung my eyes. The headlights behind me flashed again in the mirror. He wasn't just following me. He was inside me. Or at least, he wanted me to believe he was. I slammed my foot down harder, the tires clawing for grip. The night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The engine roared in protest as I pushed the car faster, weaving through the darkened streets with a desperation that bordered on madness. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every flicker of movement in the periphery a threat. The man's face lingered in my mind, etched with that unnerving smile that promised nothing but danger. My hands trembled on the wheel, but I couldn't afford to slow down, not now. I glanced again at the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, relentless, shadowing my every move. I could almost hear the sinister whisper, a voice that wasn't mine, urging me to surrender, to give in to the fear that clawed at my throat. But surrender wasn't an option. Not when the truth was buried somewhere deep in this chase, hidden beneath layers of deceit and silence. Somewhere between the shattering glass and the racing heartbeats, I knew I had to find it. To fight back. To survive. Ahead, the city lights flickered, offering both hope and danger. I took a sharp turn, the car fishtailing briefly before regaining control. The night had become a battleground, and I was running out of time. The sun was barely a whisper on the horizon when I finally pulled off the highway, my hands numb from gripping the wheel too tightly, my breath shallow and ragged. I parked the car in an empty lot near a small diner still closed for the morning. My eyes were dry now, but the tight ache in my chest hadn't eased. It was the kind of exhaustion that burrows deep, like your nerves have been frayed and reknotted into something unrecognizable. I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled, the weight of the night pressing down on me. That face. the man's face pressed against the passenger window. I kept seeing it, over and over. Not just the cold gleam in his eyes, but the way he knew exactly how to unravel me, how to make me feel small and exposed in a world built for safety. I thought about the messages on my phone, the single photo that shot my blood cold, the silence that had followed. It wasn't just random. It was calculated. He had been watching me. Waiting. The fact that he had gotten so close without me noticing was terrifying. It meant he had been inside my life in ways I hadn't seen, or maybe had refused to see. I pulled the phone from my pocket, holding it gingerly like it might shatter again. The screen was cracked, the glass spider-webbed, but still functional. A message from an unknown number sat open, blank except for a final line, "You can't hide." No photo this time. Just those words, heavy and threatening. I locked the phone and shoved it into the glove compartment. There was no point in looking back. What mattered was what I would do next. I called the police, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I told them everything, the endless highway, the car behind me, the face at the window, the messages. The dispatcher was patient, taking down details I barely remembered through the haze of adrenaline and fear. They promised to send a unit to patrol the area, to keep an eye out for the vehicle matching my description. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just about a stranger on the road. It was about control, about terror that lingers long after the headlights disappear. The officers who came were professional, asking questions carefully, their presence a thin thread of safety in a night that hadn't offered much. They took my statement, ran my car for any signs of tampering, and promised to keep in touch if anything turned up. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. Driving home felt surreal. The streets were quiet now, the morning light softening the edges of the world I'd seen through a lens of fear. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there, no headlights, no shadowy figure, just my own reflection staring back. At home, the emptiness was both a refuge and a reminder. The locks clicked firmly behind me. I double-checked windows and doors, the motions automatic, a ritual I'd never needed before. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the night settling in my bones. I thought about the man, who he was, why he had chosen me. The questions tangled inside me, but no answers came. And yet, something had shifted. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a paralyzing force, but a signal, a warning that I couldn't afford to ignore, but also a call to reclaim my sense of safety. I spent the next few days in a blur of phone calls, therapy sessions, and small acts of reclaiming normalcy. I told a few close friends what had happened, their shock and concern a balm against the isolation. I learned to lock my doors earlier, to avoid driving at night, to trust my instincts even when they screamed louder than the world around me. But most importantly, I learned to face the shadows without letting them swallow me whole. The man never showed up again. The messages stopped, the car never reappeared behind me on the highway. The police never found anything conclusive. It was as if he had vanished, swallowed by the night from which he came. And maybe that was the hardest part, knowing that the threat wasn't gone because it had been caught or punished, but because it had chosen to let me go, for reasons I might never understand. Months later, I found myself driving again, the highway stretching out in front of me under a sky deep with stars. The memory of that night was still there, a quiet ache beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. I wasn't the same person I'd been before. I was stronger, sharper, more aware of the fragile line between safety and danger. I understood now that fear could be a guide, not just a prison. As I drove, the headlights flickered in the mirror, not the glaring, relentless light of a predator, but the distant glow of passing cars, of life moving forward. I exhaled, slow and steady, and kept going. The miles slipped by beneath my tires, each one a small victory over the shadows that once haunted me. The road stretched ahead, uncertain but inviting, and I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. Whatever lay beyond the horizon, I was ready to face it, no longer running, but moving with purpose. The night embraced me, not as an enemy, but as a reminder of how far I had come. Story 3, Darkness Unseen, Haunting Sleep Deprivation. The blackout came without warning. I remember thinking how strange it was, how unsettling, that the entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness simultaneously. The usual hum of electricity was gone, replaced by the distant clang of metal and the occasional shout from somewhere down the block. For a moment, I felt almost peaceful, as if the city had paused to catch its breath. But that calm didn't last long. I'd been dealing with insomnia for days before the blackout, a creeping exhaustion that refused to let me sleep despite my desperate need for it. The blackout only made it worse. No screens to distract me, no ceiling fan to drown out the silence. Just hours of darkness pressing down from all sides, making every shadow feel deeper, every sound sharper. At first, I tried to keep myself busy. I lit some candles I had stashed in the kitchen drawer and made tea, even though the water was lukewarm from sitting in the kettle. I paced around the apartment, checking the windows and doors, listening for anything out of the ordinary. The city outside was a patchwork of black and faint amber streetlights flickering here and there, but mostly it was just dark, as if the whole world had vanished. Sleep never came, though. Not that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, a strange restlessness took hold, like my brain was wired to some invisible current I couldn't shut off. I found myself staring at the corners of the room, where the shadows pooled thickest, feeling eyes on me that I couldn't see. It was probably just my mind playing tricks, the exhaustion twisting reality into something unfamiliar. Then I started noticing the figures. They were never fully there. Always at the edge of my vision, just beyond the periphery, maybe a dark shape leaning against the far wall, a shadow that flickered too quickly to be explained by the candlelight. Whenever I turned my head to look directly, they vanished, leaving nothing but empty space and a creeping sense of being watched. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, a side effect of sleep deprivation. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing night. I tried to talk myself down, to stay grounded. The city was dangerous enough during the day, and now with no power, even more so. Maybe someone was lurking outside, trying to take advantage of the blackout. But these figures felt too close, too deliberate. Like they were inside the building, or watching from the hallways beyond my door. On the fourth night, I stayed up until dawn, sitting with my back against the wall and a baseball bat resting across my knees. The apartment felt colder than usual, even with the candles burning low on the windowsill. Shadows stretched long and threatening, and the silence was broken only by the faint creaking of the old pipes in the walls. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a figure stepping out from behind the hallway door, just a dark silhouette. I snapped my head around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, the dim light from the street lamp outside barely reaching inside. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe a rat scurrying across the floorboards. Still, I wasn't convinced. That morning, I found the lock on my apartment door scratched, the metal worn in a way it hadn't been before. It was subtle, almost easy to dismiss, but it sent a cold spike of fear straight through me. Someone had been trying to get in. I spent the rest of the day double-checking every window and bolt, moving my few belongings closer to the center of the room, and keeping my phone charged in case the power came back on. But the figures didn't stop appearing. They were always there, lurking just out of focus, watching from the edges of the room or the hallway beyond my door. Last night was the worst. I was awake again, sitting in the dark, when I heard the faintest sound, a soft shuffle, like footsteps hesitating just outside my door. My breath caught. I gripped the bat tighter, muscles tense, ready to swing at the first sign of movement. The door creaked open a sliver, and for a moment, I thought I caught sight of a shadow slipping inside. Then it was gone. No noise, no footsteps retreating, just silence. I wanted to believe it was a nightmare, some trick of my exhausted mind. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe I'm unraveling. Or maybe someone is silently stalking me in the dark. Either way, I don't think I'm alone anymore. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. Every creak of the old house sounded amplified, each gust of wind scratching at the windows like whispered threats. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting to 10, trying to steady the rapid hammering in my chest. But the unease gnawed at me, a cold weight settling deep in my gut. I edged forward, the bat still raised, eyes darting toward the dim hallway. The faint glow from the street lamp outside cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to flicker and shift. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the prickling at the back of my neck said otherwise. Suddenly, a soft thud echoed from upstairs. My heart leapt. Whoever was here wasn't gone, they were moving, watching, waiting. I hesitated, torn between fleeing and confronting whatever waited in the darkness. But the silence answered me, thick and unyielding, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The daylight was a weak thing, filtered through grimy windows and thick clouds that hung low over the city like a shroud. I hadn't slept in nearly 8 days. Each night was a fresh layer of dread, a battle between exhaustion and the pulse of fear that kept me wired. My phone, my only tether to the outside world, was charged but useless without power or signal. The city's grid was still down, and with it, every shred of normalcy I clung to. I tried to convince myself the figures I saw were tricks of the mind. Shadows, after images, the product of staring too long into darkness. But last night's door creak had been real. And the thud upstairs definitely not my imagination. I spent the morning inspecting every inch of my apartment, moving furniture to block windows, stacking chairs against the door. I found nothing that suggested forced entry. No footprints, no broken locks, no signs that someone had been inside. And yet, the feeling of being watched didn't fade, it thickened, clinging to me like a second skin. Around noon, the power flickered briefly. A single fluorescent tube in the hallway outside my door blinked to life before plunging back into darkness. The brief illumination revealed something I hadn't noticed before, faint scratches on the frame of my door, thin but deliberate, as if someone had been trying to pry it open with a knife or a screwdriver. The marks weren't fresh, but they weren't old either, somewhere in that unsettling gray area that made me wonder how long I'd been a target. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, bat resting across my knees, and tried to think. Who would want to break in? Why? My mind flicked back to my few interactions before the blackout. The landlord was usually brusque but not hostile, and I hadn't spoken to the neighbors in weeks. At the grocery store before the power went out, I'd noticed a man who kept glancing my way a little too often. He was scruffy, unshaven, with a hood pulled low over his face. I'd brushed it off then, but now it felt like a warning I'd ignored. The hours crawled by. I ate a cold sandwich, drank tap water from a bottle, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. But that afternoon, when the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the floor, the figures returned. I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A dark shape, standing just beyond the threshold of the hallway. I whipped my head around, bat raised, but the space was empty. No flicker of motion, no sound except the hum of my own breath. I wasn't going crazy, or at least, I didn't want to believe I was. Something was out there, something patient and silent. I thought about calling the police, but with the blackout, they were stretched thin. My calls went unanswered or dropped mid-ring. Even if they came, what could they do in the dark? Everyone else was on edge, scared. The city was unraveling. That evening, I heard the footsteps again. Softer this time, deliberate, pacing just outside my door. I pressed my ear to the cold wood, heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. "Who's there?" I whispered, voice barely steady. No reply. Just silence. I considered stepping into the hallway, but the darkness beyond the threshold felt like a void, an invitation to vanish. Instead, I grabbed the small, handheld flashlight I'd found when the power went out. Its beam was weak, but enough to cut through a few feet of blackness. I edged toward the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away. But when I turned, a chill ran down my spine. The hallway behind me was darker than before, the shadows lengthened and thickened, as if the darkness itself was pooling there. I wasn't alone. That night, I left every light on I could, candles, battery-powered lamps, anything to push back the dark. But it made little difference. The figures still appeared, always at the edges, always vanishing when I looked directly at them. I tried talking to my neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, the next day. She was an elderly woman who lived 2 floors above me, kind but cautious. When I called out to her from the stairwell, she hesitated before opening her door a crack. "Are you all right?" she asked, eyes flickering with concern. I explained the blackout, the insomnia, the strange sightings. She nodded slowly. "You're not the only one seeing things. Several of us have noticed people lurking. But no one wants to say it out loud." "People lurking? Like who?" She glanced nervously down the hall. "I don't know. Strange men, mostly. Hanging around the building. I think the blackouts brought out some bad folks." The words settled like a stone in my stomach. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. That afternoon, I found a crumpled note slipped under my door. The ink was smudged and jagged, like it was written in a hurry. "Stay inside. Don't trust the shadows." No signature. I felt a cold knot tighten. Someone else was watching too, or warning me. The city had become a cage, and the darkness was no longer empty. It was filled with eyes. That night, I barricaded myself in the bedroom, pushing the dresser against the door and stacking books and boxes behind it. I left the flashlight on the nightstand, bat within reach, and sat against the wall, listening. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost unintelligible, coming from the hallway outside my door. I held my breath, straining to catch the words. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low, cold, and unmistakably human. I swallowed hard, heart racing. Someone was out there. Watching. Waiting. And now I knew for certain I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, exhaustion had settled in like a thick fog, but something inside me refused to let the darkness win. I knew I couldn't keep hiding behind barricades forever. The whispered threat from last night haunted every corner of my thoughts. "You shouldn't be here." Who said that? Why me? And how many others were out there, lurking in the blackout, feeding on this new vulnerability? I decided to reach out again this time, not just to Mrs. Delaney, but to anyone who might be willing to talk. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my flashlight and the bat, and edged out into the hall. The air was stale and cold, the silence punctuated only by distant, uneven footsteps echoing through the stairwell. I called softly, "Mrs. Delaney? Are you up?" No answer. I pressed on, descending the stairs carefully, every creak sounding like a shout. On the second-floor landing, I paused. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and empty, but I caught a flicker of movement near the end, a shadow darting behind a door. My heart jumped. I shone the flashlight toward it, but the figure melted away before I could get a clear look. "Hey!" I called out, my voice steady but urgent. "Who's there?" Silence. I moved toward the door where I'd seen the movement and pressed my ear to it. Faint voices murmured inside, indistinct, but definitely human. My skin prickled. I jiggled the handle. It was locked. I backed away, heart pounding. Something was definitely wrong here. I needed answers, and quickly. Back in my apartment, I pulled out my phone, which had no signal but still connected to the building's Wi-Fi network, if only barely. I opened the group chat I'd started with a few neighbors after Mrs. Delaney's warning. Most messages were sparse, a few complaints about the heat, the lack of power, occasional sightings of suspicious figures. Then, a new message popped up from an unknown number. "They're watching us from the basement. Don't go down there." My breath caught. The basement, the place I'd been avoiding. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of damp concrete and rust. The building's storage lockers were down there, and I'd heard odd noises in the stairwell leading down during the blackout, but I'd never dared investigate. Curiosity and dread warred inside me. If people were lurking there, maybe it was the source of the threats, the note, the whispers. I had to know. I grabbed the flashlight and bat again and crept toward the basement entrance. The stairwell door was ajar, creaking softly as it shifted in the stale air. I pushed it open fully and descended into the darkness. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, the air thick and heavy. My flashlight cut through the blackness in a narrow beam, revealing rows of storage lockers and pipes sneaking along the ceiling. I moved slowly, senses on high alert, every sound amplified in the silence. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against concrete. I froze. The beam of light trembled as I swung it toward the noise. A figure crouched behind one of the lockers, face obscured by a hood. I stepped forward, raising the bat instinctively. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice low but firm. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, the hood fell back, revealing a woman's face, pale, drawn, eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "You have to listen. They're not just stalking us. They're planning something." "Who?" I asked, heart hammering. She glanced over her shoulder nervously. "The people outside. The ones who came with the blackout. They're using the darkness to take over the building, the block. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment. And it's coming soon." My mind reeled. This wasn't just random prowlers or petty criminals, this was organized, deliberate. "What do you want from me?" I asked. She hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, pressing it into my hand. "Read this. And be careful. They watch everything." I unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the hastily scrawled words. "Evacuate the building. Tonight. Or you won't leave at all." A chill ran down my spine. I looked back to find the woman gone, vanished into the shadows as silently as she appeared. I was no longer just a victim of insomnia or paranoia. The blackout had revealed something darker, more dangerous. And now, I was caught in the middle of it. Outside, the distant hum of the city was gone. The night was waiting. And so was whatever or whoever was hiding in the dark. I took a hesitant step toward the doorway, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, heavy with dread and curiosity. The faintest sound, a soft scraping, echoed from the stairwell below, barely audible yet enough to tighten the grip around my chest. I strained to listen, heart pounding in rhythm with the silence that pressed against my ears. Suddenly, a whisper brushed past me, so faint it might have been the wind or something else entirely. My breath caught as a cold draft swept through the corridor, carrying with it the scent of damp concrete and something metallic, sharp, and unplaceable. I forced myself forward, each step measured, careful, as the shadows seemed to pulse and shift just beyond the reach of the weak emergency light. The message was clear: this was no ordinary night, and the building held secrets that refused to stay buried. Somewhere down these dim corridors, the answers and the danger waited. The night crept in like a slow poison, seeping through the cracks of my apartment door and pooling in every corner. I pressed my ear against the wood, the faint scraping sound from below still there, deliberate and slow. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, and my breath came in shallow bursts. I wanted to call out, demand to know who was down there, but my voice felt stolen, trapped behind a barricade of dread. The hallway behind me was swallowed by shadows, the emergency light flickering weakly like a dying pulse. I gripped the doorframe and forced myself to move. One step, then another, descending the stairs with a caution born of desperation. The scrape became clearer, metal on concrete, like a crowbar or a wrench dragged along the edge of a step. I imagined whoever it was, crouched in the dark, waiting. Watching. Halfway down, the emergency light blinked out, plunging me into near-complete darkness. My skin prickled. I fumbled in my pocket for the small flashlight I'd grabbed earlier, its beam cutting a narrow path through the black. The beam landed on a figure just at the edge of the stairwell, a silhouette so dark it seemed to absorb the light. I froze. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, brittle and uncertain. The figure didn't answer, didn't move. It melted back into the shadows as if it had been nothing but a trick of my eyes. I wanted to believe that, but the weight in my gut told me otherwise. I was being stalked. Not by ghosts or hallucinations, but by something or someone far more real and far more dangerous. I reached the bottom of the stairs, the corridor stretching out before me like a black wound. That's when I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing against the bare concrete walls. They weren't mine. "Stop," I said, voice steadier this time, though I felt the tremor beneath it. "Whoever you are, stop." There was no reply. Just the footsteps, coming closer. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died. The darkness swallowed me whole. I fumbled for my phone, hoping for a crippled glow, but the screen remained pitch black. No signal, no charge. The only thing I had was my breath and the pounding in my ears. Then, a hand grabbed my wrist, rough, unforgiving. It yanked me backward into a narrow alcove, and I hit the wall hard, the impact knocking the air out of me. The figure pressed close, breath hot against my ear. "Quiet," a voice hissed. "Male. Low. Controlled." I nodded, heart thundering too loud, afraid it would give me away. My mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want? And how had they taken over the building so completely? The man's grip tightened, then released. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They're watching. Always watching. And if you don't leave now, well, you won't leave at all." I swallowed hard. "Who are they? What do they want?" He hesitated, then glanced toward the stairwell. "It's not just about the blackout. They're taking over the whole block. Moving in, controlling everything. You're caught in the middle." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. The woman's warning, the figures lurking in the shadows, the cold dread that had been gnawing at my sanity, all of it was real. "Take my hand," he said suddenly, pulling me from the alcove. "I'll get you out. But you have to trust me." I hesitated, every instinct screaming to run the other way, to lock myself inside and pretend none of this was happening. But I knew better. I was already too deep. As we moved through the building's bowels, I caught glimpses of movement, shadowy forms slipping between doorways, eyes glinting just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. The tension was suffocating, the silence broken only by the occasional muffled voice or the scrape of a boot on concrete. We reached the back exit, a heavy metal door that groaned when he pushed it open. The city outside was a black void, the blackout swallowing everything whole. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Then, a sharp shout shattered the night. "Stop them!" A dozen figures spilled from the shadows, blocking our path. Men and women, faces obscured by scarves and hoods, their eyes hard and unyielding. The man who had been guiding me cursed under his breath and shoved me behind him. "We're not leaving," he said, voice steady but fierce. "Not until we know what's really happening." One of the figures stepped forward, a woman with a scar running down her cheek. "You don't understand," she said coldly. "This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. If you run, you'll only bring them down on you faster." I looked between them, the lines of desperation and defiance etched into their faces. The blackout had turned neighbors into enemies, friends into strangers. The building was no longer a home, it was a battleground. And I was right in the middle of it. As they closed in, I realized the worst part wasn't the darkness outside. It was the darkness inside the people around me. The kind of darkness that thrived on fear, control, and silence. I clenched my fists, the note still burning in my pocket. Evacuate or don't leave at all. But tonight, it was clear, leaving wasn't going to be that simple. The first faint blush of dawn seeped through the cracked window pane, casting a pale light onto the battered floor. I hadn't slept. Not properly, not in days. But somehow, the oppressive weight that had been crushing me, the nightmare of darkness, the endless eyes watching from the edges of vision, had loosened its grip. The woman with the scar was still there, pacing near the metal door with a restless energy that made her look less like an enemy and more like someone trapped by circumstances neither of us fully understood. The man who had pulled me from the alcove sat nearby, his gaze steady but tired. They didn't speak much, but the silence between us was a fragile alliance. "Why didn't you run?" the scarred woman asked quietly, not looking at me. I swallowed hard, the note still tucked inside my jacket pocket, its words a ghost whisper in my mind, "Evacuate or don't leave at all." I realized now how simple they sounded, and how impossible it had been to follow them. "I couldn't," I said finally. "I needed to know who was out there. If it was really just my mind, or if someone was stalking me." She nodded slowly, almost as if that admission lifted a weight from her shoulders. "You're not alone," she said. "This blackout, it's not just a power failure. It's a cover for something darker. People have been using the chaos to settle scores, take what they want. We're caught in the middle." The man looked up then, his voice low but fierce. "We thought we could keep this building safe. Hold the line until the lights came back. But it's bigger than any of us imagined. And the longer we stay, the more dangerous it gets." I glanced toward the hallway, where the shadows still clung stubbornly to the corners. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, like the tail end of a dark figure slipping away into the depths. But I didn't turn. I didn't want to see. The blackout had stretched my mind thin, fraying what I thought was resilience. But it had also peeled back the layers of fear and isolation. I wasn't just a victim of sleepless nights or phantom stalkers. I was a witness to something that had been hiding in plain sight, how quickly people could fracture, how easily trust could dissolve into suspicion and violence when the lights went out. We sat there, three strangers bound by a city's sudden descent into chaos, waiting for whatever came next. The decision to stay or flee no longer felt like a choice between safety and danger. It was about survival of body, mind, and hope. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light that felt both alien and merciful. The power grid was slowly coming back online. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint buzz of a generator kicking in. The city was waking up, scarred but still breathing. The scarred woman finally stood, stretching her aching limbs. "We need to move," she said. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here, where they're organizing aid and security. If we stick together, maybe we can make it." The man nodded, offering me a hand. "You in?" I hesitated, the weight of the past week pressing down on me. But then I remembered the faces I'd glimpsed in the darkness, some desperate, some dangerous, all human. And I realized that fear, while real, didn't have to define me. I took his hand. As we stepped outside, the city unfolded before us in shades of gray and gold. The streets were littered with debris and the remnants of hurried escapes, but they were also marked by small acts of kindness, a neighbor handing out water, a group clearing rubble, a child's laughter cutting through the heavy air. The darkness hadn't disappeared. It was still there, lurking in the cracks and corners, waiting. But so was the light, a stubborn, unyielding thing that refused to be snuffed out. I wasn't the same person who had first locked eyes with those impossible shadows. The relentless nights had changed me, stripped away illusions and forced me to confront the raw edges of fear and courage. And as we moved forward, step by careful step, I held onto that fragile truth. Sometimes, the greatest horror isn't what's hidden in the dark, it's what we do when the lights come back on. The silence stretched taut between us, a brittle thread threatening to snap with the weight of unspoken memories. Each breath was measured, deliberate, as if drawing too deeply might summon the ghosts that lurked just beyond the flicker of the dying embers. The air tasted metallic, thick with the residue of battles fought in shadows both external and internal. I caught a glimpse of movement, a fleeting silhouette brushing against cracked walls, a reminder that the darkness was never truly gone, merely waiting for an invitation. Yet, even in that moment, the faint glow of dawn pressed insistently at the edges of the horizon. It was a promise, fragile and tentative, that even the longest night must yield. With every step forward, the weight lessened, replaced by a cautious clarity. The horrors endured had not broken me, they had forged a new resolve. In the aftermath, it was no longer about fleeing the darkness, but learning to walk alongside it, understanding that shadow and light are inextricably bound. And as the first real light spilled over the ruins, I realized that survival wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something far more profound. Story 4, Silent Intruder, Presence Beyond the Door. The house was too quiet for a Saturday night. I had spent the evening on the couch with a book I'd picked up earlier that week. The kind of novel that barely demands your attention but offers enough distraction to keep your mind off the endless emails and meetings that filled my weekdays. Outside, the rain had started early, tapping lightly against the windows, and inside, the dim glow of the reading lamp was the only light besides the flicker of the fireplace. Everything was in its usual place, the stack of magazines on the coffee table, the half-empty mug of chamomile tea cooling beside me, the worn throw blanket I draped over my knees. Normal. Around 10, I decided to turn in. The bedroom was at the end of the narrow upstairs hallway, past the bathroom and the guest room where I kept my spare clothes and the boxes I hadn't unpacked since moving in 6 months ago. I'd lived alone since the divorce, and the quiet had been a balm in many ways, even if it left me feeling a little exposed now and then. I locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and made sure the alarm was set. The security system was basic, motion sensors and a loud siren, but it gave me a sense of control I rarely felt during the day. The neighborhood was supposed to be safe, but news stories about break-ins and home invasions had a way of creeping into my thoughts late at night. Climbing the stairs, I heard it then, a faint shuffle, like someone moving upstairs, but not in the hallway. It was softer than footsteps, almost like a breath or a shifting weight on the floorboards. I froze, listening harder. Nothing. Just the rain again, steady and unrelenting. Maybe it was the owls settling, I thought. Old houses made all sorts of noises, especially when the weather changed. I shook off the unease and slid the bedroom door shut behind me, locking it as I always did. The room was bathed in the pale light of the street lamp outside, filtered through the thin curtains. I pulled them closed, breathed out slowly, and climbed into bed. The bed was familiar, a little too big for one, but I had never gotten rid of it after the divorce. The mattress sagged just enough to remind me of restless nights and empty sheets. I turned off the lamp and lay on my back, listening. The rain, the clock, and then, just faintly, another sound. The shuffle again, this time softer, but unmistakable. I sat up, heart thudding. The door was locked. No windows open. Every window in the house was shut tight. Yet the sound persisted. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the bathroom. It was here. In the room. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room, the dresser, the chair by the window, the closet door slightly ajar. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. I told myself to calm down. Maybe it was the wind catching the curtains, or the old pipes settling. But then the air shifted, colder suddenly, and I felt it, a presence in the room, just beyond the edge of the light. My breath caught. I scanned again, slower this time. And then I saw it. A silhouette, pressed against the far wall near the closet, barely visible in the shadows. Not quite a trick of the light. Not a shadow cast by furniture or the window frame. Someone was in my bedroom. They weren't hiding to break in or rummage through drawers. They were watching me, waiting for me to wake up. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay back down, heart hammering, and kept the flashlight steady on that dark shape. The night stretched on, and I realized this wasn't a random break-in. This was something else. Something worse. Because if they were already here, in my bedroom, watching me sleep, then I was no longer safe. Not in my own home. Not anywhere. The figure didn't shift. It simply remained there, a shadow carved out of the gloom, as if it were a part of the night itself. My breath caught in my throat, each second stretching endlessly. My mind raced. Should I confront it? Should I bolt for the door? But fear glued me to the bed, and the flashlight's beam trembled slightly with my unsteady hands. Then, a voice, soft, almost a whisper, broke the silence. "You're not supposed to see me yet." The words sent a chill spiraling down my spine. The voice was familiar, but distorted, like a memory twisted by time. I forced my eyes to adjust, searching for any recognizable features. The figure stepped forward just a little, revealing a face slipping between clarity and shadow. It was someone I thought I'd lost, someone I shouldn't be seeing here, not now. Why are you here?" I managed to croak, the flashlight illuminating a flicker of pain in those ghostly eyes. The figure's lips curled into a sad smile. "There are things you need to remember. Things you bury too deep." The air thickened, charged with unspoken truths. "You've been running from this for too long." My pulse pounded louder than ever. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the figure moved closer, fading at the edges like mist. "Tell me what you want," I whispered, desperate for answers, for something to hold on to in this nightmare. The figure's gaze pierced through the darkness. "To remind you that nothing is as it seems. And to warn you the past isn't finished with you yet." Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone with the pounding silence and a fear that had just taken on a new name. I didn't sleep that night. When morning finally came, I moved cautiously, as if the walls themselves might betray me. The house was quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the heavy silence that settles after something unsettling has happened. I forced myself out of bed into the kitchen, my legs stiff and my head pounding with exhaustion. Coffee was a necessity, a small anchor to the day's reality. I tried to piece together what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. The face, the voice, it was someone from my past. Someone I thought was gone for good. But that made no sense. Why show up here? In my bedroom? And what did they want me to remember? The words echoed relentlessly, but I had no answers. I checked my phone, half expecting a message, a call, anything. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts. No trace of anyone who might have come close to the house last night. It was like the intruder had slipped in and out without a trace, except for the dreadful presence that still clung to the air. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to figure out what was happening. So I started looking around the house, retracing every step I'd taken the night before, searching for any sign of forced entry or disturbance. The front door was locked, the windows sealed tight. Nothing obvious. But then I found it, a faint smudge on the inside of the bedroom window, barely visible in the morning light. It looked like a fingerprint, smudged and smeared, but definitely human. I pressed my finger to it, feeling the cold glass beneath my skin. That was proof. Someone had touched the window. Someone had been close enough to watch me sleep. The reality settled over me like a wet blanket. I called my sister, Claire, my voice tight with urgency. She had always been my anchor when things got dark. When she answered, bleary-eyed and confused, I barely explained before blurting out, "I think someone's been in my house. Last night. Right here, in my bedroom." There was a pause on the other end, then her voice steadied. "Are you safe now? Do you want me to come over?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what to do. But I need you here." Claire promised she'd be over by noon. I hung up, feeling a sliver of relief, but also a rising panic. What if it wasn't over? What if whoever was here last night was still around, watching, waiting? I started pacing the living room, glancing out the windows, listening for any hint of movement. The house suddenly felt too big, too empty. Then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The text was simple, chilling in its casualness. "You can't hide from what's coming." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And it was proof that whatever had happened last night was only the beginning. I tried calling the number back, but it was blocked. No trace, just like the intruder. Whoever this was, they knew me well enough to get under my skin, to peel back the layers I'd worked so hard to keep intact. The hours until Claire arrived dragged like years. I checked the locks again, barricaded the bedroom door with a chair, and sat in the corner, flashlight in hand, ready for anything. My mind wandered to the figure's words, "The past wasn't finished with me." What did that mean? What had I buried so deep that it was now clawing its way back, threatening to unravel everything? When Claire finally stepped through the door, her face was grave, her eyes scanning the house like she expected an ambush. She crossed the threshold without hesitation and pulled me into a hug. For a moment, I let myself lean on her, but the fear didn't fade. "We're going to figure this out," she said firmly. "Together." But even as she spoke, I noticed something, an unspoken worry behind her eyes. Something she wasn't telling me. Later, as we sat in the living room, I showed her the smudge on the window. She frowned, then stood abruptly. "I want to check something," she said. She disappeared down the hallway and returned with a box of old photographs. We spread them out on the table, images from years past, family gatherings, birthdays, moments I tried to forget. And there, in the background of one photo, was a shadowy figure, blurred, almost invisible, but unmistakably watching me. A chill ran through me. The past wasn't just a memory. It was alive, lurking just beneath the surface, and now it was here, in my house, watching me. Claire looked at me, her voice low but urgent. "Who do you think that is?" I swallowed hard, the weight of the question settling like a stone in my gut. I had no idea. But one thing was clear, whatever this was, it wasn't random. It was personal. And it wasn't finished. The lights flickered suddenly, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When they came back on, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. And then, from upstairs, I heard a faint creak. Like a footstep. Someone was still here. Someone was still waiting. I edged toward the staircase, heart pounding in sync with each cautious step. The silence stretched, broken only by my shallow breaths. Shadows danced along the walls, and with every flicker, I braced for what or who would emerge from the darkness. That night, I hardly slept. I tried to tell myself to rest, to let the night pass. But the moment I laid my head down, the sensation returned. Something was here, not outside, not just upstairs, but much closer. Too close. I had this sinking feeling that I wasn't alone in my own bed. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from a creaking floorboard or a shadow shifting in the corner. It was more visceral, like a breath on the back of my neck, an unseen weight pressing down, waiting. I kept my eyes shut, heart hammering, willing myself to stay calm. I told myself it was all in my head. But then I felt it, cold, deliberate, a gaze that wasn't mine. I dared a slow blink, and in the dim moonlight spilling through the curtains, I saw him. A man. Sitting in the chair by my bedroom window, his eyes fixed on me. Not moving, not making a sound. Just watching. I froze. The blood in my veins turned ice. My mind raced, scrambling for the right move, but my body refused to obey. I blinked again, and he didn't blink back. He had a face I didn't recognize, but there was something familiar in the way he held himself, calm, patient, like a predator waiting for the right moment. I wanted to scream, to bolt, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I slowly turned my head, trying to catch a better glimpse. His hands rested on the armrests of the chair, fingers twitching slightly. His jaw was set tight, lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to wait. I swallowed hard, mind spinning. How had he gotten in? I had locked the doors, double-checked the windows. Was Claire right to be worried? Was this what she had been afraid to tell me? I sensed movement behind me, a shadow shifting near the doorway. My breath hitched. I barely dared to turn, but when I did, there was no one there, just the empty hallway, swallowed in darkness. The man hadn't moved. He hadn't even blinked. I tried to steady my breathing. I needed a plan, fast. But my fingers trembled so badly I couldn't reach my phone on the bedside table. My legs felt like lead. The man was still watching. Waiting. Then, a noise from downstairs, soft but definite. The scrape of a shoe against the hardwood floor. I wasn't alone in the house, and whoever was here wasn't just lurking upstairs. They were moving. Panic surged through me. My eyes darted back to the man, desperate to see if he'd noticed. He didn't flinch. I realized then that he wasn't just watching me sleep. He was waiting for me to wake up. And when I did, whatever came next would be far from accidental. Heart pounding, I forced myself to sit up slowly, careful not to make a sound. The man's eyes locked with mine, and for a flicker of a second, I thought I saw something in them, a spark of recognition. Or maybe just cold calculation. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice barely audible. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, moving toward the door with a deliberate slowness. My limbs refused to move, but my mind screamed at me to act. The scrape downstairs grew louder. Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open wider, and Claire stepped inside, eyes wide with alarm. She froze when she saw the man. Without a word, she lunged toward the light switch, flooding the room with bright glare. The man vanished. Claire grabbed my hand, pulling me up. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Now!" As we stumbled out of the room, my gaze caught something on the floor, an old, crumpled photograph, half buried beneath the chair. I picked it up and unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a picture of me, only younger, standing with my parents in front of this very house. But scribbled in black ink across the back were words I didn't recognize, a name I hadn't heard in years. And beneath it, a date, the day I thought I had finally escaped the past. But the past wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. Claire looked at the photo, then back at me, her voice low but steady. "This changes everything." I didn't know what that meant yet. But I knew one thing for sure. From this moment on, there was no turning back. The intruder wasn't just a stranger. They were connected to my history, to the secrets I had buried deep. And if I wanted to survive, I had to confront them no matter what it cost. Outside, the first hint of dawn crept across the sky. But inside, the shadows were growing darker than ever. Claire's eyes hardened as she folded the photo carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. "I've been piecing things together, and it all points to someone we both should have never crossed paths with," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to shrink around us, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down like a suffocating fog. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through every memory, every name that could link me to this stranger. Who else knew about the past I tried so desperately to forget? The realization hit me like a cold wave. Trust was a luxury I no longer had. Not with Claire, not with anyone. "We need to move fast," she urged, glancing toward the window where the sun was now spilling light reluctantly into the room. "They're closer than we thought, and they're watching. Every step we take, every breath we draw, it's all under their scrutiny." Her gaze locked with mine, fierce and unwavering. "Are you ready to face what's coming?" I nodded, the resolve settling deep within me. Dawn might bring light, but the darkness we were about to step into was far more dangerous and far more personal than anything I had ever imagined. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo again, the younger me, smiling, unaware of what the future held. I traced the scribbled name on the back with a shaking finger. It was a name I hadn't heard in years, someone I thought was gone from my life for good. But the intruder had brought that past back with them, like a dark stain spreading under the surface. Then I heard it, the faintest sound, almost imperceptible, coming from somewhere above me. A soft creak from the attic hatch in the ceiling. My heart lurched. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling, the wind pushing through the eaves. But I knew better. The intruder was here. I stood slowly, every nerve on edge, and moved toward the closet. My hand searched blindly for the flashlight Claire had left me, but it wasn't there. In a panic, I grabbed a heavy baseball bat I'd kept by the door since the night before. It felt solid in my hands, a meager comfort against the unknown. The noise came again, this time a faint shuffle, so quiet I had to strain to hear it. It was above me, in the attic space I'd never thought much about until now. The hatch was only a few feet from my bed. I swallowed hard, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Then, a sudden, sharp creak like a nail scraping wood right above me. I froze. And that's when I realized the truth. The intruder wasn't just somewhere upstairs. They were already inside this room, watching me. The blood drained from my face. Somewhere in the shadows, something shifted. I caught the faintest silhouette near the corner of the ceiling, just beyond the reach of the morning light. I wasn't alone. A wave of cold terror swept over me, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Panic would only make me weaker. I gripped the bat tighter and scanned the room, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would betray me. The intruder's breathing was steady, almost calm. How long had they been here? How long had they watched me sleep, waiting for me to wake? I crept toward the window, hoping to get a glimpse outside, maybe spot Claire or anyone who could help. But the street was empty, and the early morning mist blurred everything beyond the glass. I was cut off. Then the sound came again, a faint tapping, deliberate. It was coming from the closet. I spun around, raising the bat just as the door creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall and lean, face obscured by the dim light and a hood pulled low. "Don't scream," the voice was low, controlled, cold. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Not yet." My grip on the bat tightened. "Who are you? What do you want?" They paused, then pulled back the hood, revealing a face I hadn't seen in over a decade, the man from my past, the one I thought I'd left behind. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, but the familiarity made my blood run colder than the morning air. "You remember me," he said, almost amused. "You thought you could escape. But you were wrong. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight. But the room felt smaller now, the walls closing in like a trap." The intruder stepped closer, calm and deliberate. "I've been waiting for this," he said. "Waiting for you to face what you buried." Something snapped inside me, a surge of defiance amid the terror. "Why are you here? Why now?" He smiled, but it was a cruel twist of his lips. "Because the past never forgets. And neither do I." Behind him, the attic hatch rattled, and I knew it wasn't just the two of us anymore. I wasn't alone in this house. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to end quietly. The air thickened, charged with an unseen menace as shadows lengthened and pulled around us. The intruder's gaze never wavered, cold and unyielding, but my eyes started to the hatch, my mind racing for escape or defense. The faint scuffle of footsteps above hinted at more than just presence. They brought with them a weight of years, secrets best left untouched. "Who else is there?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. A low chuckle escaped the intruder's throat. "Old ghosts," he said, "and new ones too. They've been waiting, just like me. Waiting for you to finally remember." Memories I tried to lock away surged forward, faces, voices, moments I had fought to erase. The attic had always been off limits, a silent sentinel over my past. Now, it was the stage for reckoning. Suddenly, the hatch creaked open wider, and a figure emerged, shrouded in dust and time. Her eyes, piercing, sorrowful, locked onto mine. Recognition flashed in them, but it wasn't warmth I saw. "You can't run from this," she whispered, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Not anymore." The walls seemed to pulse, alive with the weight of unspoken truths. The intruder stepped back, almost reverent now, as if this presence held the true power. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. This was no longer just a confrontation, it was a confrontation with my own history, my own buried pain, clawing its way back into the light. And as the attic's darkness spilled down the stairs, wrapping around us all, I realized that the secrets I'd hidden had never been silent. They'd been waiting. Waiting to be heard. Waiting to be faced. And I had no choice but to listen. The morning light was faint, filtering in through the cracked blinds and casting thin, pale ribbons across the floor. I hadn't slept. How could I? After the intruder's words, after the attic hatch creaked open and that figure emerged, the ghost of my past standing in the dimness of the old staircase, I felt every secret, every buried memory clawing its way to the surface. I was raw, exposed, and yet, beneath the terror, something else had begun to stir, a strange, fierce clarity. The intruder was gone. The figure from the attic, the woman with those piercing, sorrowful eyes, had vanished as quietly as she had come. I didn't know if she was real or a fragment of my fractured mind, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay trapped beneath the weight of silence any longer. The past, it seemed, had finally caught up with me, and I had no choice but to face it. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked slowly toward the stairs leading to the attic. The door was still ajar, swinging slightly on its hinges. I hesitated, the old fear gnawing at the edges of my resolve, but I stepped forward, reaching out to push it open wider. The attic was dusty, the air stale with years of neglect. Boxes and old furniture were scattered haphazardly, coated in a film of cobwebs. But in the corner, under a shaft of morning light, something caught my eye: a faded photograph, face down on a cracked wooden crate. I picked it up, turning it over carefully. It was a picture of my family, taken years ago before everything fractured. My parents, my younger self, and a woman I barely remembered. The woman from the attic. My aunt. The one who had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind a silence that had echoed through my childhood. I sank to the floor, the image trembling in my hands. The pain I'd buried for so long surged forward: betrayal, loss, the loneliness I disguised with anger and denial. The intruder's cruel smile made sense now. He hadn't come just to scare me. He'd come to force me to reckon with what I'd hidden away. And the attic woman, the ghost he'd called her, was a symbol of that reckoning. I stayed there for a long time, the photograph resting against my chest, until the front door creaked open downstairs. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed up the hall. I wiped tears hastily from my face and stood as the door to my bedroom opened. Mom appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, but there was something softer there now, an understanding I hadn't seen in years. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. The years of silence between us felt brittle but fragile, ready to shatter or heal. "I'm sorry," she began, voice thick, "for everything that happened. For not telling you the truth about your aunt. For letting you grow up so alone." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry too," I admitted. "For shutting you out. For pretending none of it mattered." We sat together, the first honest conversation in a decade unfolding between us. She told me about the family's secrets, the pain that had divided us, and the reason she kept the attic closed off, like a wound too raw to touch. I shared my fear, my confusion, and the nights I spent feeling watched and hunted in my own home. As the morning deepened, something shifted. Where there had been walls of silence, there were now bridges of understanding. The house, once a prison of shadows, began to feel like a place where healing could start. Later that day, we went through the attic together. We sorted through the boxes of forgotten memories, uncovering old letters, photographs, and mementos that told the story of a family fractured but not broken. The intruder's presence lingered in my mind not as a threat, but as a catalyst. He had forced me to confront the past, to stop running from the pain and start facing it head-on. That night, I slept in my bed without fear. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Something had shifted, not just in the air, but in me. I was no longer the person who had lived in terror, shadows, or haunted by silence. I was someone who had faced the darkness and refused to be consumed by it. The past no longer controlled me. I controlled it. And that made all the difference. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the floor. I woke with a strange sense of peace, as if the weight that had pressed on my chest for years had finally lifted. The world outside seemed less daunting, the future less uncertain. For the first time in a long while, I felt ready to move forward, not just survive, but truly live. There were still scars beneath the surface, old wounds that would take time to heal. But I no longer feared their presence. They were part of my story, a testament to the battles I had fought and the strength I had discovered within myself. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, healing never is. But I was willing to walk it, step by step. As I prepared for the day, a quiet resolve settled over me. No longer would I allow my history to define my identity or dictate my choices. The past was a chapter, but not the entire book. Now, the pen was in my hand, and I was ready to write what came next. Story 5, Silent Pursuit, The Van That Watches. I had never been particularly aware of the city's rhythm until I found myself moving through it alone every evening. The first time I noticed the van, it was barely a blip in my periphery. I was crossing the intersection at 5th and Monroe, headphones in, halfway through a podcast about urban legends. A white, unmarked cargo van pulled up at the red light beside me. Nothing stood out, no logos, no company name, just an empty shell of a vehicle. But something about the way the driver's head tilted as if studying me made me glance up. The window was rolled down just a crack, but I couldn't see a face clearly. The light changed, the van pulled ahead, and I thought no more of it. It wasn't until 2 nights later that I saw the same van again. This time it was parked at the curb a block away from my apartment building, its engine idling softly. I was heading home from the gym, wiping sweat from my forehead, when I caught sight of it through the corner of my eye. The driver's seat was empty, but the sliding door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, a subtle discomfort settling in my chest, but the street was quiet and I had no reason to be concerned. I told myself it was probably just someone making a delivery or stopping for a break. I didn't want to imagine something sinister. By the 4th evening, the van had become an unspoken element of my walks. I'd see it parked in different spots outside the grocery store on Elm, near the coffee shop on Pine, sometimes cruising slowly a few yards behind me as I made my way home. It was almost as if it was shadowing me, but when I turned to look, there was no one inside, or the driver would dart away behind tinted windows like a ghost. I started timing the appearances, wondering if it was some odd coincidence, or perhaps a new security patrol for the neighborhood. The streets were supposed to be safe, but the van unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. I mentioned it to my coworker, Jenna, over coffee one afternoon. She laughed, brushing it off as paranoia. "You're letting the city get to you," she said, stirring her latte. "Maybe it's a contractor or something. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, but the unease lingered. That night, the city felt heavier, more watchful. The usual buzz of distant sirens and honking horns was muted, as if the world was holding its breath. Then, the newspaper hit my doorstep the next morning with a headline that made my heart skip: "Local man vanishes without a trace." The article was short, factual, no leads, no suspects. I scanned the description: 32 years old, lived just 3 blocks from me. The address was a few streets over, in the same neighborhood where I'd been seeing the van parked. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The van had been there again the night he disappeared. I couldn't be sure, it was just a gut feeling, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself it was coincidence, that the city was full of stories like this, tragedies that had nothing to do with me or the van. Still, I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder during my evening walks, searching for that familiar shape, that rolling shadow that had become an unwelcome companion in my life. And then, just as I started to convince myself it was all in my head, I heard the faint, almost imperceptible click of a door sliding shut behind me one night, and I knew with a certainty I couldn't ignore. I was being watched. I froze, every nerve on edge, my breath shallow and quick. The street was empty, bathed in the cold yellow glow of the street lamps, but the silence pressed in on me like a living thing. My fingers twitched against the rough fabric of my jacket as I tried to make sense of the sound, the subtle, mechanical murmur of a door sliding closed, but there was no movement in the shadows, no figure stepping out from the darkness. I wanted to run, to call out, to do anything other than stand there trembling, but my feet were rooted to the cracked pavement. The van's presence had seeped into my bones, a toxic residue I couldn't shake no matter how far I walked or how many nights I slept elsewhere. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a neighbor returning home, a stray cat slipping through a gate, but the rational part of my mind was drowning beneath a tide of dread. Slowly, I turned around, scanning the dim outlines of the houses lining the street. The windows were dark, curtains drawn tight, but in the corner of one, a faint glow flickered as if a television had been left on. I thought about knocking, about asking someone, anyone, for help, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? I think someone's following me? It sounded childish, paranoid even, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. I took a tentative step forward, then another, each one measured and careful. The click had come from the old garage next door, the one with the rusted metal door that no one seemed to use anymore. Legend had it the place was abandoned, but if someone was hiding there, waiting for me, perhaps the stories weren't so far from the truth. A sudden rustle from the overgrown weeds by the fence made me jerk around. My heart pounded like a drum as a pair of glowing eyes stared back at me, an animal, maybe a stray dog or a raccoon, and I exhaled sharply, the tension flowing out of me in a shuddering breath. But the van was nowhere in sight. I forced myself to keep walking, the cold night air biting through my clothes, my senses on high alert. Every shadow was a threat, every creak a potential sign that I wasn't alone. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a second. Behind me, the street lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach out for me. I swallowed hard and quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing hollowly in the night. Somewhere deep inside, I wondered how much longer I could live like this, trapped between fear and the unknown, hunted by a ghost I couldn't see but couldn't escape. Morning came sluggishly, the light seeping through the thin curtains in uneven patches. I forced myself up, the cold floor sending a shiver through my bare feet. The apartment felt unusually quiet, a hollow shell compared to the restless noise in my head. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, too bitter, too hot, and tried to think clearly, to separate the real from the imagined. Yet the nagging feeling persisted. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was wrong. I decided I couldn't wait for the next night to find out more. It was time to look for clues, to see if anyone else had noticed the van or if it had left a trace anywhere. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside, the morning air crisp and unforgiving. The street was empty. A few cars were parked along the curb, their windshields fogged over. I walked slowly, eyes scanning every detail. I remembered the van had no markings, no logo, no license plate visible on the rear. That was unusual, especially in a city where every vehicle seemed to broadcast its purpose. Delivery trucks, taxis, maintenance vans, they all bore some identification. This one was anonymous, like a shadow on wheels. Across the block, I spotted Mrs. Calderon tending her garden. She was the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, always humming to herself and waving when we passed. Gathering courage, I approached her. "Good morning, Mrs. Calderon," I said, forcing a smile. "Have you seen a white van around here?" "Unmarked, I mean." She looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place the description. "White van," she echoed. Well, I might have seen one a few days ago, parked near the corner. Looked out of place to me, but you know how the neighborhood's changed. Folks come and go. Did you notice if it was there yesterday or this morning? She shook her head. No, not since then. Why, you ask? I hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. Just been feeling a bit uneasy. Thought maybe someone was watching. Her expression softened. Honey, you've been cooped up too long. But if it helps, I haven't seen any trouble. Just keep your eyes open. I thanked her and moved on, the exchange leaving me no closer to answers. At the corner where she said the van had been, I crouched down and peered at the cracked pavement. There were faint tire marks, fresh enough to suggest recent passage. Nearby, a scrap of paper fluttered in the breeze, a torn receipt from a convenience store, dated 3 days ago. I pocketed it, the familiar feel grounding me. As I turned back, my phone buzzed, a text from Jamie, my closest friend and the only person I confided in. Did you sleep well? Anything weird last night? I typed back quickly. Not exactly. I think someone's been following me. Saw a white van again. No idea why. Minutes later, another message. That sounds serious. Want me to swing by? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep this to myself, to avoid worrying anyone else. But isolation was suffocating, and Jamie was the one person who could keep me anchored. Yeah. Come over in an hour? She replied instantly. On my way. I spent the next hour pacing the apartment, eyes darting to the windows every time a shadow passed outside. My thoughts spiraled. What if the van wasn't just following me? What if it was connected to the disappearances I'd read about in the news? The missing woman from 2 blocks over, the man who vanished from the park bench last week. Every time the van appeared, someone nearby went missing. It was too much to ignore. When Jamie arrived, her presence was a relief. She stepped inside with her usual confident smile, though I could tell she sensed the tension lingering in the air. Okay, spill it, she said, dropping her bag by the door. What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost? I swallowed hard and told her everything, the van, the clicks, the empty streets, the vanishings. As I spoke, I saw her brow furrow, her usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern. This is serious, she said quietly. Have you thought about going to the police? I did, I admitted. But what could I say? Someone's following me in an unmarked van, and people are disappearing? They think I'm crazy. Jamie nodded. Maybe. But if there's a pattern, they need to know. We can't just sit on this. We spent the next hour combing through local news sites, looking for connections. Jamie pulled up missing person reports, comparing dates and locations. Each disappearance seemed random at first glance, but the more we looked, the clearer the pattern became. The white van had been spotted near each case, always just before the person vanished. A chill settled over me. This wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate. I don't get it, I said. Why me? Why now? Jamie shrugged. Maybe you noticed it first. Maybe you're just more aware. Or maybe she stopped herself, eyes darkening. Maybe you're next. The thought was a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down I knew she was right. Before we could say more, my phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. Stop looking. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Jamie reached for my hand, steadying me. We're in deeper than we thought, she said. But we're not alone. We'll figure this out. Outside, the street was quiet, but I knew the van was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting. And I was running out of time. The morning light slanted weakly through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the kitchen table where Jamie and I sat, cups of cold coffee between us. Jamie rubbed her temples, her brow tight with frustration. "I've been thinking," she said finally, voice low. "If whoever's behind this is warning you off, they must know you're poking around. Either they're watching your phone or—" She stopped, eyes narrowing. "Are you sure your phone's secure?" I swallowed, remembering the strange glitch the other night when the screen flickered oddly after that message. I thought it was just a bug. Should I get it checked? "Definitely," Jamie said. "But we can't wait for that. We need more than just paranoia and missing person reports. We need proof. Proof." The word felt heavy in the air. I looked at my phone again, wondering if it was a trap waiting to snap shut. Jamie stood and crossed to the window, peering out at the street. The city was waking up, but I knew better than to relax. The van, somewhere out there, was probably already on the move. "Last night," I said, breaking the silence, I retraced the steps to the last place the van appeared. The park near 8th Avenue. It was empty, but I found something weird. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to a page where I'd scribbled a description. Jamie leaned in. "Go on." There was this tiny scrap of paper, like part of a flyer or receipt. It had a partial phone number and the word "safe passage." I don't know what that means, but it was taped under the bench where I was sitting. Jamie frowned. "Safe passage? That sounds like a code," or she stopped herself again, biting her lip. It could be a message for someone in the van or whoever's orchestrating this. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications settling heavily between us. "Okay," Jamie said, breaking the quiet. "We need to find out who's behind that number. If it's connected to the van, maybe it'll lead us somewhere." I nodded, grateful for some direction. I tried calling it, but it was disconnected. "Maybe we can trace it through other means," Jamie said, already typing on her laptop. "I know a guy who works in telecom. If we give him the partial number, he might be able to pull up more info." I felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly drowned by the nagging fear that we were poking a hornet's nest. Then Jamie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and paled. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, then showed me the screen. It was a photo message, blurry, grainy, taken from a distance. The van, parked 2 blocks away from my apartment. "And someone standing right outside my door," she added quietly. I felt my breath hitch. My heart hammered in my chest. "Jamie," I whispered, "that's my place." She nodded grimly. "They're watching you. Watching both of us." The room suddenly felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with dread. "We have to move," Jamie said, voice tight. "Tonight. I can't risk you staying here." I didn't argue. I knew she was right. That afternoon, we packed a small bag with essentials, careful not to draw attention. Jamie arranged for a friend to let us crash at his place somewhere off the grid, at least for a while. Before leaving, I double-checked the windows and doors, but the feeling of being watched never left. When I stepped outside, the street was eerily quiet, but I caught the flash of white out of the corner of my eye. The van. It was parked across the street, engine off, but the driver's side window was down just enough to catch a glimpse of a shadow inside. I froze. Jamie grabbed my arm. "Come on," she whispered urgently. "We can't let them see us like this." We crossed the street and hurried down the block, heartbeats pounding in sync. The van stayed put for a moment, then slowly pulled away, tires humming softly against the asphalt. We didn't stop running until we were several blocks away, hidden behind a row of closed storefronts. I glanced at Jamie. What now? She looked around, then whispered, now we find out who's inside that van. And why they're haunting us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the city's shadows deepened, swallowing the streets whole. Somewhere in that darkness, the van was still moving closer than ever. And I was running out of places to hide. The weight of the evening pressed against my chest, every breath shallow and sharp. Jamie pulled her jacket tighter around her, eyes scanning the dim alleyways as if the answers might materialize from the shadows themselves. We need to think fast, she muttered. If they're tracking us this closely, there's no way to outrun them forever. I nodded, the cold creeping into my bones despite the adrenaline. My mind raced through every detail, faces we'd seen, strange messages on our phones, that fleeting glimpse of a symbol painted on the van's side. It wasn't random. Someone wanted us specifically. We need a plan, I said, voice low. Someplace public, crowded. Somewhere where they can't just grab us. Jamie's eyes flickered with reluctant agreement. The old library? It's closing soon, but those crowds could buy us some time. A distant siren wailed, cutting through the stillness. The city wasn't asleep yet. We couldn't be either. With one last glance over our shoulders, we slipped from the alley, moving as shadows ourselves, silent, vigilant, and running out of time. Jamie and I slipped into the old library just as the last golden threads of daylight bled out of the sky. I kept glancing toward the front windows, eyes darting every time headlights swept past. The van hadn't shown yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The whole night was a countdown, a slow unraveling of whatever thread had tied me to this nightmare. Jamie sank against the wood-paneled wall, her breath coming in ragged. What are they after? She whispered. Why us? I had no answer. Nothing concrete beyond the fact that every time that van appeared, someone disappeared. The pattern was undeniable now, and terrifying. But why me? Why Jamie? My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. I glanced down, heart sinking. Another message. No sender, just a string of numbers and an address. The message was new, like a fresh wound open where I'd hoped the bleeding would stop. Look at this, I said, voice low, showing Jamie the screen. The address was somewhere deep in the industrial district, a stretch of warehouses and loading docks I barely knew. Jamie frowned. This has to be a trap. I nodded, but there was no choice. The message had come from the same untraceable number linked to the van. If we wanted answers, we had to go. We left as quietly as we could, slipping through the library's back exit and into the chill night. The streets seemed more hostile now, shadows twisting around every street lamp like they had teeth. My hands trembled, not from cold but from the heavy weight of what lay ahead. As we neared the industrial district, the city's familiar hum faded into a distant drone. Here, the buildings loomed like dark monoliths, their windows empty, eyes staring down at us. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting quicksilver shadows that merged and split with every step. We paused at the corner where the address indicated. A warehouse, brick and steel, with a single door marked by rust and grime. No sign of a van. I held my breath. Suddenly, headlights flared behind us. My heart slammed against my ribs. The van. It rolled into view slowly, engine purring like a beast ready to strike. Jamie grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the shadows. No way we can outrun that here. I swallowed hard. We were trapped between the van and the warehouse. And then movement near the door. A figure stepped out, tall, shoulders broad beneath a dark jacket. The kind of person who didn't belong anywhere but places like this, quiet, dangerous, and precise. He spoke without greeting. You've been asking questions you shouldn't. His voice was calm, but every word was a blade. We don't want to hurt you. But if you keep digging, it won't be just you disappearing next. Jamie's eyes flashed with defiance, but I could see the fear behind it. We were exposed, vulnerable in a way that made the night suffocating. Who are you? I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. The man smiled thinly. Let's just say, we're the ones making sure things don't get out of hand. And you've been a problem for a while. I felt the cold edge of the truth settling over me. This wasn't random. This was a calculated hunt, and the van was the trap closing around us. Behind the man, the van's sliding door creaked open, revealing two more figures. Their faces were shadowed, but their intent was clear. There would be no negotiation. Jamie pulled me back, tucking me toward the warehouse door. Come on, she hissed. We need to get inside. I hesitated, then followed. The door groaned as we pushed it open, stepping into the vast, empty space inside. The darkness swallowed us instantly, but it was better than standing out in the open. The van's engine revved, tires screeching as it stopped just outside. Footsteps echoed behind us. We can't stay here long, I whispered. Jamie nodded, pulling out her phone. I'm trying to call someone, anyone. But there's no signal. I scanned the warehouse, looking for anything: doors, windows, a way out. The place was a tomb, empty except for scattered crates and the faint smell of oil and rust. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping past us with surgical precision. Hide! Jamie hissed. We ducked behind a stack of crates, hearts pounding so loud I was sure they'd give us away. The beam passed just inches from where we crouched. I could hear the men moving, slow and methodical, like predators savoring the chase. Time stretched unbearably. Every second felt like a lifetime, every breath a risk. Then, a voice from the shadows, "You're not going anywhere." The man from before stepped into the weak beam of light, flanked by his two companions. Their faces were hard, unyielding. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was it. The moment the nightmare became real. Jamie squeezed my hand. Whatever happens, we stick together. I nodded, knowing that the truth, terrible and raw, was about to come crashing down. And then, without warning, the flashlight flickered and died. The darkness closed in like a shroud, and the chase began anew. I could hear their footsteps closing in, heavy and relentless. Panic surged, but Jamie's grip tightened, a silent anchor amid the chaos. We had to move, now. My breath hitched as I stumbled forward, arms outstretched, fingers grazing rough stone walls. The cold dampness seeped into my skin. Somewhere ahead, a faint scrape echoed, metal on concrete. No, footsteps two-paced, deliberate. They were tracking us. Left. Jamie hissed, pulling me sharply. I followed, heart hammering against my ribs like a warning drum. The air grew thinner, the stale scent of mildew thickening. A sudden crash echoed behind us. Something heavy had fallen, blocking the path we'd just fled. Relief surged briefly until the sound of slow, methodical clapping emerged from the blackness. Well played, a voice drawled, low and mocking. But the game's not over. I swallowed hard. Recognition flickered. The voice belonged to Marcus, the man we thought we'd lost weeks ago. His cruel smirk was unmistakable now, even in the obscurity. Jamie cursed under her breath. He's been waiting. Then we have to finish this, I said, voice steady despite the fear. No more running. The faintest glimmer of light appeared ahead, a sliver of hope. We sprinted toward it, the shadows twisting and stretching to catch us. Behind, Marcus's laughter followed like a plague. This time, we'd face the nightmare head-on, or we'd never see dawn again. The morning light was a cruel contrast to the night's terror. We had made it out. Somehow, against all odds, we had escaped Marcus and his twisted game. The van, the unmarked, sinister van that had stalked me through the city, linked to every disappearance, was no longer a mystery. Marcus had been the driver, the orchestrator. He was the reason people vanished, swallowed by a network of fear and violence woven quietly into the city's underbelly. It was a truth so raw and disturbing that it refused to settle neatly, no matter how much daylight filtered through the curtains. I rubbed my hands over my face, tasting the stale metal of anxiety. "I still can't believe it ended like that," I said finally. "I thought we were done for." Jamie turned and gave me a small, tired smile. "Neither did I. But we didn't just run, we fought. We found a way out." Her voice was steady, though the dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed the battle she fought inside. The aftermath wasn't just about survival, it was about reckoning. The police had arrived hours after our escape, alerted by a passerby who noticed the abandoned van parked haphazardly near the old warehouse district. Marcus and his accomplices were arrested. The details were still unfolding: how many people disappeared, how long this had been going on. The news coverage barely scratched the surface, but it was enough to confirm that the nightmare had been real. I thought about the people whose faces I'd never known, whose names I'd never hear, but who had been swallowed by that same darkness. That van had been their last sight of the world as they knew it. And now, their stories were tangled with ours. The weight of that thought settled deep in my chest. I wanted to say their names, to give them back some measure of humanity the van had tried to erase. Jamie leaned forward, her voice low. "What happens now? For us?" I met her gaze, the question hanging between us like a fragile hope. "We rebuild," I said after a pause. "Not just our lives, but our sense of safety. We can't forget what happened, but we don't have to live in fear." She nodded slowly. "I'm scared, though. What if someone else like Marcus is out there? What if the city just swallows more people and no one notices?" Her fear was valid. The city was a maze, and beneath its surface, darkness could hide in plain sight. But I knew that fear couldn't dictate the rest of our lives. "We'll be vigilant," I promised. "And we'll lean on each other. Maybe even help others who feel trapped or watched." Jamie's lips quirked into a tired but genuine smile. "Yeah." No more silence. It was a resolution born not from bravado but from a quiet strength we hadn't known we had. The trauma had changed us, yes, but it hadn't broken us. I thought about my own reflection, how much I'd changed. The person who'd first noticed the van, who had been paralyzed by the slow, terrifying realization of its meaning, was not the person sitting here now. I was someone who had faced the darkest parts of the city and myself and come through. That night, when the flashlight died and the shadows closed in, I had felt utterly powerless. But running had taught me something essential. Power wasn't about never being afraid. It was about moving forward despite that fear. Jamie caught my hand across the bed. "Thank you," she said simply. I squeezed back. "Thank you for not letting me fall apart." We sat together, the morning light slowly burning away the last threads of night. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution two people had made against the darkness. There was no tidy ending to this story. The scars would remain in the city, in us. But we had reclaimed something precious, the choice to live, to fight, and to hope. And that choice was ours alone. The hours that followed stretched out with a gentle patience. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence, as if words might shatter the fragile peace we'd found. I watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, the way the soft morning light caught the edges of her hair. It was in these small, quiet moments that the enormity of what we'd survived began to sink in, not as a headline or a story told, but as something deeply personal, lived and felt. Outside, the city's pulse quickened, cars honking, footsteps echoing off concrete, the distant hum of life reclaiming itself. But inside the room, time seemed to fold in on itself, offering a rare reprieve from the chaos. It wasn't that the world had changed, it was that we had. Hardened, yes, but also softened in unexpected ways. We had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was the thread that held us together, even when everything threatened to unravel. I traced idle patterns on the blanket between us, each touch a quiet affirmation. We didn't need promises or plans, not yet. The future felt like a fragile thing, tentative, uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it also felt possible. Hope wasn't some distant star, it was the small flame flickering right here, between us. She turned to look at me, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we'll face it. Together." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Together," I echoed, meaning it more than words could say. Outside, the city carried on, relentless and unyielding. But in this room, in this moment, we had found something no darkness could touch, the quiet courage to keep going. Story 6, City Quake, A Silent Terror Awakens. The morning had started like any other. I'm Alex, by the way. I worked as a graphic designer in a small agency downtown, a job that paid the bills and left me with enough free time to nurse a mild obsession with old jazz records and street photography. My daily routine was as predictable as the sunrise: wake up, coffee, listen to a record or two, check emails, and then head out to the office. That morning, I was halfway through a steaming mug of black coffee when the first tremor hit. It was subtle at first, just a slight vibration under my feet, like the thrum of a distant train. I paused, spoon halfway to my lips, as the vibration grew stronger, shaking the window panes and sending a few loose papers fluttering to the floor. The city's low murmur shifted, car horns blared, glass tinkled somewhere below, and a low rumble rolled through the streets. I remember standing frozen, heart thudding, as the building creaked and groaned around me. The lights flickered once, twice, then died altogether, plunging the apartment into a gray, flickering gloom. The tremors lasted maybe 30 seconds, long enough to make me certain this wasn't just a passing tremble. It was an earthquake. I'd felt minor quakes before, the kind that shook the cups in the cabinet or sent a shiver through the city's bones, but this was different. This was the city's warning, the ground itself trembling in protest. I grabbed my phone, no signal. The power was out. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam slicing through the darkness in a narrow, shaky line. Outside, the usual morning chaos had turned into something else entirely. I stepped onto the balcony, the air thick with dust and the sharp tang of something burnt. Down the street, I saw a crowd gathering, people shouting, a few scrambling over debris. A low cloud of dust hung over the city like a shroud. My apartment building creaked again, and I took a step back inside, heart racing. I switched on the radio, hoping for news, but only static answered. The building's emergency alarm, usually a piercing siren, was silent. I flicked on the TV, black screen. The city was waking up, but it was different now, fractured, uncertain. I spent the next hour pacing, listening to the occasional distant crash as buildings somewhere else succumbed to the shaking. I grabbed a small backpack, stuffing in water bottles, some granola bars, my phone charger, a first aid kit I'd bought years ago but never needed, and a flashlight. I didn't know why I was preparing to leave, only that staying put felt wrong. The strange thing was, despite the chaos outside, my building still felt stable. The walls held firm, the windows intact. But the unease gnawed at me like something else was coming, something I couldn't see yet. Then, as I was about to step outside to check the street more carefully, I heard a soft knock at my door. It was tentative, almost hesitant. I froze. Another knock, sharper this time. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one had called or texted. The city was collapsing, and here was a stranger, or maybe a neighbor, standing on the other side of my door. I edged to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was dimly lit by emergency lights, flickering weakly. The corridor was empty. No one. I blinked, and then the knocking came again, this time from the apartment directly across the hall. My heart hammered. I debated whether to open the door. Maybe it was someone trapped, someone needing help. Or maybe it was something worse. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. I glanced down the hallway, toward the stairwell. The emergency exit sign flickered erratically, casting a sickly green glow over the cracked tiles. I was about to step inside and lock the door when I heard it, a low groan, distant but unmistakable. It was coming from the stairwell. Fear and curiosity tangled in my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the door, every nerve screaming to stay put, but something pressed me forward. The groan came again, louder, closer. I reached the stairwell door and pushed it open just enough to peer inside. The stairs were cloaked in shadows, dust motes swirling in the narrow beam of my flashlight. At the bottom, a figure lay motionless. I swallowed hard, the cold grip of dread settling over me. The city had cracked open, and I was standing at its edge, alone. And whatever was coming next, I wouldn't be ready. A sudden scuffle echoed from below, scraping against the walls like claws on stone. My breath hitched. The figure shifted, a faint groan escaping its lips. I swallowed the rising bile and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the unknown was pulling me deeper into the abyss. Closer now, I could make out the ragged breaths, shallow and desperate. The flashlight flickered, threatening to die, and in that brief darkness, I froze. When light returned, I saw the face of a man, gaunt, eyes white with terror and pleading. His hand twitched, reaching toward me. "Help," he rasped. But before I could respond, a chilling whisper slithered through the stairwell, carrying a promise of despair. My heart slammed against my ribs. There was no turning back now. Whatever darkness had seeped into the city was alive, watching, waiting. And I was caught in its grip. I knelt beside the man, forcing myself to breathe evenly despite the pounding in my chest. He swallowed, lips cracked and dry. "Broken leg, can't get up." "Please," the word hummed like smoke in the stale air. I glanced around the stairwell. The cracked concrete walls seemed to press in closer, the shadows twisting unnaturally as my flashlight flickered again. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but I couldn't leave him here, not with the city crumbling around us both. "Stay still," I said, searching for something to stabilize him. The railing was bent and sharp, useless. My fingers brushed over the rubble-strewn steps, and I spotted a length of rebar, rusted but sturdy. Carefully, I slid it beneath his armpits. "Can you hold on?" He nodded, grimacing. I hauled him upward step by step, the groans of shifting debris echoing faintly through the stairwell. Each movement sent tiny avalanches of dust and gravel tumbling down. The man's weight made my muscles scream, but I forced myself to ignore it. Outside, the flickering green exit sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly glow. When we reached the landing, the groan came again, not from him but somewhere deeper in the building, a low, rumbling sound like the building itself was struggling to exhale. My flashlight's beam danced erratically over the cracked tiles, revealing a trail of dried blood smeared along the wall. "Where did you come from?" I asked, my voice tight. "Downstairs, in the basement," he rasped. "I was looking for supplies. Found some water, then the ceiling collapsed. I couldn't move my leg. I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. The basement was a known risk zone. The quake had shattered its supports, turning it into a death trap. Yet someone had been there recently, maybe still there. "Can you walk if I help you?" I asked. He shook his head. "Too much pain." I glanced back toward the hallway, toward the door I'd hesitated to open earlier. The silence outside was thick, almost suffocating. I didn't want to be alone with the darkness, not after hearing the whisper in the stairwell. But helping this man meant moving deeper into the building, into places I couldn't see or predict. "We'll rest here a moment," I said, pressing my palm to his forehead. He was burning up, feverish. "Then we need to find a safer place." He nodded weakly, eyes closing as exhaustion took him. I sat beside him on the cold, cracked floor, flashlight balanced between us. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of something rotten, like old garbage left to decay. I tried to steady my breathing, but every creak and groan of the building set my nerves on edge. After a few moments, I noticed something strange, faint scratch marks on the wall beside us. They weren't random. Someone had carved letters, messy, uneven. I leaned closer, the light trembling in my hand. "Help me," the message spelled out. My heart lurched. Whoever had scratched this was desperate, trapped in this building like me. But when? Recently? Days ago? I traced the letters with a trembling finger, then looked back at the man. "Did you see anyone else down there? Anyone who might have left this?" He shook his head, eyes fluttering open again. "No. Just me." I frowned. The building was supposed to be deserted except for the injured and the unlucky trapped inside. But evidence suggested otherwise. Someone had been here. Someone scared enough to carve a plea into the wall. "What about supplies?" I asked. "Did you find anything useful?" He shook his head again. "Just a few bottles of water, a half-empty pack of crackers." Not enough. I stood, stretching cramped muscles. "I'm going to look around, see if there's more." He reached out suddenly, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "Be careful," he warned, voice low but urgent. "Not everyone out there is friendly." I nodded, though the warning chilled me. I'd already sensed it, the way shadows moved just beyond the flashlight's reach, the faint echoes of footsteps that didn't belong to the building settling. I edged toward the stairwell door, glancing once more at the carved message. "Help me," it said. The words were a ghost, a reminder of how thin the line was between survival and surrender. Outside, the hallway stretched empty and silent, but the city beyond was a different kind of nightmare. I could hear distant shouts, the sharp crack of collapsing concrete, and something else, a low murmur of voices, too close to be ignored. I moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping the corridor. The emergency exit sign flickered overhead, its light casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to reach for me. The walls on either side were scarred with cracks, plaster peeling like dead skin. Then I heard a sudden, sharp noise from the far end of the hall. A door slammed somewhere above me, followed by hurried footsteps retreating into the dark. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." No answer. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing back, cold and empty. I took a step forward, then another, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The footsteps had stopped, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it, a presence, watching from the shadows, waiting. Then I saw it, a pair of eyes reflecting faintly in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the light. They were wild, wary, and filled with something raw and desperate. "Who's there?" I demanded, heart thudding. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they melted back into the shadows, disappearing like a ghost. I swallowed hard and moved on, every step heavier than the last. The city was breaking apart, and so was my sense of safety. The man downstairs was counting on me, but now I wasn't sure if the real danger lurked in the crumbling walls or in the people who still roamed these ruins. As I rounded a corner, I stumbled over something hard. Flashlight beam flicked down another message, this one scrawled hastily on a piece of torn paper pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. Don't trust them. They take what you have, then leave you to die. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked up, heart pounding. The corridor stretched into darkness, swallowing the faint hum of voices ahead. I wasn't just trapped in a broken city. I was trapped in a web of fear and mistrust, where every shadow could hide a threat, and every stranger might be my last mistake. And somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for me to make the wrong move. Daylight was reluctant, gray and hesitant, bleeding through the cracked windows like it was afraid to fully enter this fractured world. The note I'd found last night, don't trust them. They take what you have, then leave you to die, kept replaying in my mind. Who were they? The shadow in the corridor? The man I'd barely met downstairs? Or was it a warning about every person left in this city, all of us reduced to hunting scraps and scraps of hope? I needed answers. More than that, I needed a plan. I edged forward, flashlight off now, relying on the weak daylight. The corridor ahead opened into what used to be the library's main hall. Rows of toppled shelves lay strewn across the floor, books soaked and torn. Somewhere beneath the rubble, the faint groan of twisting metal whispered reminders of the building's fragility. I moved carefully, senses alert. A sudden noise, a soft scraping, made me freeze. From behind a collapsed shelf, a young woman emerged, her face streaked with dirt and tears, eyes wide and wild. She clutched a battered backpack to her chest like a shield. "Wait," I said, raising a hand. "I'm not going to hurt you." She hesitated, then nodded, voice shaky. "You're the one from the corridor last night, aren't you?" I nodded. "Yeah. I'm trying to find a way out." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, relief. Suspicion? Me too. But it's not like before. "They're out there," she said, jerking her head toward the shattered windows, "and they don't want anyone leaving." "Who?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "The others. The ones who've taken over parts of the city. They've got weapons now, guns, knives, anything they can find. And they're organized. Not just desperate." A cold chill ran down my spine. I thought about the footsteps, the eyes in the dark. "Have you seen them?" She hesitated again, then nodded. "They took my group last week. One by one. I barely escaped." I looked at her carefully. She seemed genuine, too exhausted and broken to lie. But desperation had a way of twisting truth, and in this city, every story had its own dark corners. "What's your name?" I asked. "Lena." "Lena, do you know if there's any safe place left? Somewhere people are gathering?" She shook her head. "No. Everyone's moving, hiding. Some say the old subway tunnels might be a refuge. But no one's sure. The subway tunnels." I remembered the maps I'd seen in the library, the routes underground that might still be intact. It was risky, but it might be the only chance I had. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the building's entrance, followed by shouting. Lena's face went pale. "They're here." "Who?" "Those others. They're searching for survivors or anyone with supplies. I grabbed her arm. We need to move. We darted through the wreckage, the building groaning ominously around us. Dust floated in shafts of light, swirling as if disturbed by some unseen force. We reached a back exit, a narrow stairwell leading downward. "Subway," Lena whispered. "This way." The stairs were slick with grime, the walls streaked with water stains and graffiti. Every step echoed too loudly in the silence. At the bottom, a rusted gate barred the entrance. Lena pulled out a small crowbar from her backpack and worked on the lock. "Almost," she muttered, fingers trembling. Behind us, voices grew louder, closer. Panic surged through me. If they caught us here, there'd be no escape. The lock clicked open. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in the dim, damp tunnel of the subway. The air was cooler here, but heavy with the smell of mold and rot. Lena pulled a flashlight from her pack, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rusted tracks disappearing into the depths. "We can follow this," she said. "It leads to the old maintenance station. It's sealed, but it might be our best bet." I nodded, heart hammering. I trusted her for now. We moved quickly but cautiously, every sound amplified in the quiet tunnel. Suddenly, a faint light flickered ahead, unnatural and wavering. "Wait," Lena breathed, holding up a hand. We crouched behind a broken concrete pillar, peering toward the glow. Down the tunnel, a small group of people huddled around a fire, makeshift weapons in hand, faces grim and hardened. Leaders, I guessed. They weren't just survivors. They were the ones Lena warned about. One of them, a tall man with a scar slicing through his cheek, spoke sharply, voice low but commanding. "We can't let more people wander in here. Supplies are running out, and trust is a luxury we can't afford." I felt Lena tense beside me. "They'll kill us if they find us." I swallowed the lump in my throat. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about power. Control. The fragile threads holding this broken city together were fraying fast. "We have to keep moving," I whispered. Lena nodded, but then she glanced back toward the darkness behind us. "Wait," she said, voice barely audible. "Did you hear that?" A faint shuffling, almost like a whisper, came from the tunnel's far end. Something or someone was approaching. I turned, heart pounding. The beam of my flashlight caught a figure stepping into the light, face obscured by a hood. "Stop right there," the figure said, voice calm but edged with danger. I raised my hands slowly, the weight of the moment crushing down. This city was no longer just a maze of broken concrete and shattered dreams. It was a battlefield, and I had just stepped into the crossfire. The stranger moved closer, and in the dim light, I saw the glint of a knife at their waist. "Looks like you found the subway," the voice said. "Not many make it this far." I swallowed hard, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Because now, I wasn't just trying to survive the earthquake. I was trying to survive the people who had survived it. The stranger's eyes flicked over me like a predator sizing up its prey. The faint smell of damp concrete and dust hung heavy in the air, mixing with something else, something metallic and sharp. I could barely make out their features in the dim, flickering light of a broken subway lamp. Their clothes were torn, patched in places, and smeared with dirt and something darker. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. The knife at their waist was a clear warning, but I needed answers more than I needed to run. They smirked, a cold, unsettling grin that didn't reach their eyes. "Names don't mean much down here." "Not anymore." "But you're a rare one. Most people don't even know this place exists. The earthquake buried the world above, but down here, the fight just got worse." I nodded slowly, remembering how the city above had crumbled. The faint light flickered again, casting long, jittery shadows along the tunnel walls. Lena's hand tightened around my arm, her knuckles white beneath the dirt. The stranger's eyes, sharp and unreadable beneath the hood, flicked between us and the firelit group farther down the tunnel. "Name's Gray," the stranger said, voice low, deliberate. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No one just wanders into our territory." Lena swallowed hard. "We're just looking for supplies. Food. Water." Gray's gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat longer than it should have. "That's what they all say." He glanced back toward the circle of survivors. "You've got two choices. Turn back now, or come with me. We can talk inside." I glanced at Lena. Her face was pale, but she nodded. We had no real choice. Gray motioned with a quick jerk of his head, and we followed him deeper into the tunnel. The firelight grew fainter behind us, swallowed by the dark, cracked concrete walls. The air grew colder, damper. Somewhere, water dripped steadily, a slow rhythm like a ticking clock counting down. The group near the fire didn't move, didn't call out. They just watched us go, their eyes dark and wary. Gray led us down a side passage, one narrower and more precarious than the main tunnel. Loose rubble crunched beneath our boots, and I kept expecting the sound to echo back like a warning. I didn't know if it was the fear or the silence, but every breath felt too loud, too exposed. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a rusted metal door, set into the wall like a wound in the earth. Gray pulled a key ring from his pocket, rattled it once, then slid a key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Inside was the smell of damp wood and stale air, mingled with something sharper, metal and sweat. The space was small, cramped, maybe an old storage room or a guard post. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging gently, casting uneven light. Two men sat at a rough table strewn with cans, empty bottles, and a battered radio. Both looked up as we entered, eyes narrowing. Gray nodded at them. "Got some visitors." The taller of the two men rose slowly, his face shadowed but unmistakably hard. Well, he said, voice gravelly. "Looks like we caught ourselves some fresh meat." I felt Lena press closer, her breath quick and shallow. The tension in the room knotted tight, thick enough to choke. "Name's Carter," the tall man said, stepping forward. His eyes locked onto mine with unsettling intensity. "You're lucky Gray brought you in before the others saw you." "Others?" I asked, swallowing the lump in my throat. Carter smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This place isn't just a shelter. It's a fortress. And we're the ones holding the gates. You're lucky to be alive, but don't think that makes you one of us." Lena's voice was steady, but I caught the tremor beneath it. "We just want to get through the city. Find a safe place." Carter laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Safe? In this city? You're dreaming. Nothing's safe anymore. Not the buildings, not the streets, not the people." He circled us slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "But maybe you can be useful. Maybe you've got skills we need. Maybe you can earn your keep." I glanced at Lena. She met my gaze, and I saw the same question in her eyes. Are we going to make it out of this alive? Gray stepped forward, cutting the charged silence. "Carter, we don't have time for games. They're not here to join us. They're just passing through." Carter's eyes flicked to Gray, and for a moment the two men seemed to weigh each other, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Carter shrugged. "Fine. But if you try anything, I won't hesitate." He nodded toward the door. You can stay in the back room. No funny business. Cray gestured for us to follow him past the table and into a narrow corridor. The walls here were scarred with graffiti and chipped paint. The air smelled of mold and old blood. The room Cray led us to was barely more than a closet, with a thin mattress on the floor and a small window high above, barred and grimy. I sank down, exhaustion weighing heavy in my limbs. Lena sat beside me, her fingers trembling as she pulled a thread loose from the mattress fabric. "We're trapped," she whispered. "They'll never let us go." I clenched my fists. "We have to find a way. We can't stay here." Outside the door, muffled voices rose and fell, laughter, arguments, the occasional bark of an order. The radio crackled faintly, a ghostly reminder of a world we'd lost. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the stale air. Then, suddenly, the door cracked open. Cray stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Lena and I exchanged a glance, the cold dread settling deeper in my stomach. Cray closed the door behind him. "There's something you need to know. About the city. About Carter. And about what's coming next." He hesitated, then added, "Because whatever you think you're surviving so far, it's only getting worse." The weight of his words pressed down on me like the rubble above. Outside, the city groaned and shifted, a living nightmare closing in. And I realized then that trust was no longer a choice. It was a gamble with death. Cray's next words echoed in the cramped room, sealing the night's fate. "There's a group moving through the ruins. Not like us. Not survivors. They're hunting." I swallowed hard, the blood pounding in my ears. "Hunting? What do you mean?" He leaned in, voice low and urgent. "They don't care about food or shelter. They want control. And they're coming for this tunnel next." The walls seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening. Outside, the city held its breath. And we were the prey. Cray's words echoed in my mind as I lay on the thin mattress, the thread Lena had pulled unraveling slowly in my hand. Morning light crept through the dirty, barred window, casting thin lines across the peeling walls. Lena sat beside me, eyes wide but fixed. We hadn't slept. Neither had I. The air was thick with quiet tension, broken only by the distant groans of shifting debris and the occasional murmur from Cray's group outside the door. Cray returned before noon, his face harder than the day before. "We have to move," he said without preamble. "The hunters won't wait for us to get comfortable." Lena's lip trembled as she stood. "Where? We don't even know where safe is anymore." Cray shrugged, a shadow flickering across his gaze. "There's a service tunnel beneath the city, old subway lines. If we can reach it, it might give us a way out. Farther from the surface, farther from them." The thought of the dark, cramped tunnels made my throat tighten, but I nodded. Staying here meant waiting for death or worse. We gathered what little we could carry, a rusted crowbar Cray insisted on, a few cans of food scavenged from the mess hall, and a battered flashlight with flickering batteries. Lena clutched my arm as we shuffled down the corridor, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The city outside was a cracked mirror of what it had been. Streets were choked with fallen concrete and twisted metal, windows gaped open like empty eye sockets. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, sharp, frantic, then silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept moving. Cray led us through a maze of ruined buildings, his knowledge of the city's underbelly our only guide. I kept my eyes on the shadows, every noise twisting into a threat. The hunters, whoever they were, had already started their rounds. We heard the rumors, groups with guns, organized and ruthless, stripping survivors like us of everything. At one point, we came across a group of 3 men barricaded inside a collapsed storefront. They eyed us with suspicion, weapons at the ready. Cray raised a hand in peace and called out softly, looking for shelter. "No trouble." The men exchanged glances, then one nodded, lowering his makeshift rifle. "You're lucky. The hunters passed here yesterday. Took 2 of us. Left the rest to rot." His words were a bullet to the chest. We moved on quickly, the weight of their story heavy on my mind. Hours later, the entrance to the subway tunnels loomed ahead, a gaping maw in the earth, half blocked by rubble and rusted gates. Cray knelt and began prying at the debris. "We'll go in pairs," he said, glancing at Lena and me. "Stay close, stay quiet. The tunnels are a maze. If you get separated, don't call out." The cold air from the tunnel hit us like a wall, damp and stale. The beam from my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Lena squeezed my hand, steadying herself. We moved slowly, the silence almost worse than the noise outside. Somewhere deep in the tunnel, water dripped steadily, echoing like a metronome counting down our time. Then came the first sound that wasn't ours, a faint shuffle, distant but unmistakable. Cray froze, signaling us to do the same. The footsteps multiplied, approaching with steady rhythm. I could feel the panic rising, but Cray's steady breath reminded me to focus. "They're close," he whispered. "We can't outrun them here. The hunters had found us." Cray pulled me and Lena into a narrow alcove, hidden behind a broken wall. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give us away. The footsteps passed by, slow and deliberate, voices low and harsh. One voice cut through the darkness, spread out. "They can't hide forever." I clutched the crowbar, every muscle tense. This was it, the edge of survival or death. When the hunters moved on, Cray motioned for us to follow. We pressed deeper into the tunnels, the walls closing in around us. I realized then that trust wasn't just a gamble, it was survival. Cray had risks we hadn't fully understood before. But without him, we had no chance. Hours passed. Exhaustion blurred the edges of my mind. Then, finally, a faint light ahead, a glow from the surface above. Cray led us up a narrow stairwell, broken but intact. We emerged behind a shattered office building, the sun dipping low on the horizon. The air was sharp and cold, but it was free. We were out. Lena leaned against a crumbling wall, tears streaking dirt and grime. "We made it," she whispered. I stared at the city sprawled before us, scarred, broken, but still there. We had lost so much, but we were alive. Cray looked at us, his usual hardness softened. "This city's a graveyard now. But maybe we can build something from the ashes." I nodded, the weight of the past days settling into something like resolve. I wasn't the same person who had stumbled into that back room. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something stronger, hope. Not the foolish kind, but the kind born from facing nightmares and choosing to keep walking anyway. As night fell, we found shelter in the ruins, a small fire flickering against the dark. We shared the last of our food, and for a moment, the city felt less like a tomb and more like a place to live. The hunters were still out there, shadows among shadows. But we had each other, and that was enough for now. I closed my eyes, not to escape the horror, but to accept it. The city had broken us, but it hadn't finished with us yet. And neither had I.